Chapter 9. Competitors. The open space before the gates of the Sak el Abid was thronged with motley, jostling, noisy crowd that at every moment was being swelled by the human streams pouring to mingle in it from the debauching labyrinth of narrow, unpaved streets. There were brown-skinned Berbers in black goat hair cloaks that were made in one piece with a cowl and decorated by a lozenge of red or orange color on the back, their shaven heads encased in skull caps, or simply bound in a cord of plaited camel hair. There were black Saharoi who went almost naked, and stately Arabs who seemed over-muffled in their flowing robes of white with the cowls overshadowing their swarthy, finely featured faces. There were dignified and prosperous-looking Moors-in, brightly colored Silhams astride of sleek mules that were richly caparisoned, and there were Tagarines, the banished Moors of Andalusia, most of whom followed the trade of slave dealers. There were native Jews in somber black jalabas and Christian Jews, so-called because bred in Christian countries, whose garments they still wore. There were Levantine Turks, splendid of dress and arrogant of demeanor, and there were humble Kololis, Kabyles, and Biscaris. Here a water seller, laden with his goatskin vessel, tinkled his little bell. There an orange hawker, balancing a basket of the golden fruit upon his ragged turban, bawled his wares. There were men on foot and men on mules, men on donkeys and men on slim Arab horses, an ever-shifting medley of colors, all jostling, laughing, cursing the ardent African sunshine under the blue sky where pigeons circled. In the shadow of the yellow tapia wall squatted a line of whining beggars and cripples soliciting alms. Near the gates a little space had been cleared and an audience had gathered in a ring about Meta, a beggar troubadour, who, to the accompaniment of djembe and gaita from two acolytes, chanted a doleful ballad in a thin, nasal voice. Those of the crowd who were patrons of the market held steadily amain, and, leaving their mounts outside, passed through the gates through which there was no admittance for mere idlers and mean folk. Within the vast quadrangular space of bare, dry ground, enclosed by dust-colored walls, there was more space. The sale of slaves had not yet begun and was not due to begin for another hour. And meanwhile a little trading was being done by those merchants who had obtained the coveted right to set up their booths against the walls. They were vendors of wool, of fruit, of spices, and one or two traded in jewels and trinkets for the adornment of the faithful. A well was sunk in the middle of the ground, a considerable octagon with a low parapet and 3 steps. Upon the nethermost of these sat an aged, bearded Jew in a black jalaba, his head swathed in a colored kerchief. Upon his knees reposed a broad, shallow black box, divided into compartments, each filled with lesser gems and rare stones, which he was offering for sale. About him stood a little group of young Moors and 1 or 2 Turkish officers, with several whom the old Israelite was haggling at once. The whole of the northern wall was occupied by a long penthouse, its contents completely masked by curtains of camel hair. From behind it proceeded a subdued murmur of human voices. These were the pens in which were confined the slaves to be offered for sale that day. Before the curtains, on guard, stood some dozen corsairs with attendant Negro slaves. Beyond and above the wall glistened the white dome of the Zawiya, flanked by a spear-like minaret, and the tall heads of a few date palms whose long leaves hung motionless in the hot air. Suddenly in the crowd beyond the gates there was a commotion. From one of the streets 6 colossal Nubians advanced with shouts of, "Oak! Oak! Warda! Way! Make way!" They were armed with great staves, grasped in their 2 hands, and with these they broke a path through that motley press, hurling men to right and left and earning a shower of curses in return. "Balak! Make way! Way for the Lord Asad ed-Din, the exalted of Allah! Way!" The crowd, pressing back, went down upon its knees and grovelled as Asad ed-Din, on a milk-white mule, rode forward, escorted by Tsammani his wazer and a cloud of black-robed janissaries with flashing scimitars. The curses that had greeted the violence of his Negroes were suddenly silenced. Instead, blessings as fervent filled the air. "May Allah increase thy might. May Allah lengthen thy days. The blessings of our Lord Muhammad upon thee. Allah send thee more victories," were the benedictions that showered upon him on every hand. He returned them as became a man who was supremely pious and devout. "The peace of Allah upon the faithful of the Prophet's house," he would murmur in response from time to time, until at last he had reached the gates. There he bade Tsammani fling a purse to the crouching beggars. For is it not written in the most perspicuous book that of alms ye shall bestow what ye can spare, for such as are saved from their own greed shall prosper, and whatever ye give in alms, as seeking the face of Allah shall be doubled unto you? Submissive to the laws as the meanest of his subjects, Asad dismounted and passed on foot into the Sak. He came to a halt by the well, and, facing the curtained penthouse, he blessed the kneeling crowd and commanded all to rise. He beckoned Sakr el-Bahr's officer Ali, who was in charge of the slaves of the corsair's latest raid, and announced his will to inspect the captives. At a sign from Ali, the Negroes flung aside the camel-hair curtains and let the fierce sunlight beat in upon those pent-up wretches. They were not only the captives taken by Sakr el-Bahr, but some others who were the result of one or two lesser raids by Biscayne. Asad beheld a huddle of men and women, though the proportion of women was very small, of all ages, races, and conditions. There were pale, fair-haired men from France and the north, olive-skinned Italians and swarthy Spaniards, Negroes and half-castes. There were old men, young men, and mere children, some handsomely dressed, some almost naked, others hung with rags. In the hopeless dejection of their countenances alone was there any uniformity. But it was not a dejection that could awaken pity in the pious heart of Asad. They were unbelievers who would never look upon the face of God's prophet, accursed and unworthy of any tenderness from man. For a moment his glance was held by a lovely black-haired Spanish girl, who sat with her locked hands held fast between her knees, in an attitude of intense despair and suffering. The glory of her eyes increased and magnified by the dark brown stains of sleeplessness surrounding them. Leaning on Samani's arm, he stood considering her for a little while. Then his glance traveled on. Suddenly he tightened his grasp of Samani's arm, and a quick interest leapt into his sallow face. On the uppermost tier of the pen that he was facing sat a very glory of womanhood. Such a woman as he had heard tell existed, but the like of which he had never yet beheld. She was tall and graceful as a cypress tree. Her skin was white as milk, her eyes, too, dark as sapphires, her head of a coppery golden that seemed to glow like metal as the sunlight caught it. She was dressed in a close gown of white, the bodice cut low and revealing the immaculate loveliness of her neck. Asad ed-Din turned to Ali. "What pearl is this that has been cast upon this dung heap?" he asked. "She is the woman our Lord Sakr el-Bahr carried off from England." Slowly the Basha's eyes returned to consider her, and insensible though she had deemed herself by now, he saw her cheeks slowly reddening under the cold insult of his steady, insistent glance. The glow heightened her beauty, effacing the weariness which the face had worn. "Bring her forth," said the Basha shortly. She was seized by two of the Negroes, and to avoid being roughly handled by them, she came at once, bracing herself to bear with dignity whatever might await her. A golden-haired young man beside her, his face haggard and stubbled with a beard of some growth, looked up in alarm as she was taken from his side. Then, with a groan, he made as if to clutch her, but a rod fell upon his raised arms and beat them down. Asad was thoughtful. It was Fenzeli who had bidden him come look at the infidel maid whom Sakr el-Bahr had risked so much to snatch from England, suggesting that in her he would behold some proof of the bad faith which he was forever urging against the corsair leader. He beheld the woman, but he discovered about her no such signs as Fenzeli had suggested he must find, nor indeed did he look for any. Out of curiosity had he obeyed her prompting, but that and all else were forgotten now in the contemplation of this noble ensample of northern womanhood, statuesque almost in her terrible restraint. He put forth a hand to touch her arm, and she drew it back as if his fingers were afire. He sighed. How inscrutable are the ways of Allah, that he should suffer so luscious a fruit to hang from the foul tree of infidelity. Samani, watching him craftily, a master sycophant profoundly learned in the art of playing upon his master's moods, made answer, "Even so perchance that a faithful of the Prophet's house may pluck it. Verily all things are possible to the one. Yet is it not set down in the book to be read that the daughters of the infidel are not for true believers?" And again he sighed. But Samani, knowing full well how the Basha would like to be answered, trimmed his reply to that desire. "Allah is great, and what hath befallen once may well befall again, my lord." Asad's kindling eyes flashed a glance at his wazer. "Thou meanest Fenzeli, but then, by the mercy of Allah, I was rendered the instrument of her enlightenment." "It may well be written that thou shalt be the same again, my lord," murmured the insidious Samani. There was more stirring in his mind than the mere desire to play the courtier now. Twixt Fenzeli and himself there had long been a feud begotten of the jealousy which each inspired in the other where Asad was concerned. Where Fensley removed the Wazir's influence must grow and spread to his own profit. It was a thing of which he had often dreamed, but a dream he feared that was never like to be realized, for Assad was aging, and the fires that had burned so fiercely in his earlier years seemed now to have consumed in him all thought of women. Yet here was one as by a miracle, of a beauty so amazing and so diverse from any that ever yet had feasted the Basha's sight, that plainly she had acted as a charm upon his senses. She is white as the snows upon the Atlas, luscious as the dates of Tafilalt, he murmured fondly, his gleaming eyes considering her what time she stood immovable before him. Suddenly he looked about him, and wheeled upon Samani, his manner swiftly becoming charged with anger. "Her face has been bared to 1,000 eyes and more," he cried. "Even that has been so before," replied Samani. And then quite suddenly at their elbow a voice that was naturally soft and musical of accent, but now rendered harsh, cut in to ask, "What woman may this be?" Startled, both the Basha and his Wazir swung round. Fenzeli, becomingly veiled and hooded, stood before them, escorted by Marzak. A little behind them were the eunuchs and the litter in which, unperceived by Assad, she had been borne thither. Beside the litter stood her Wazir Ayyub el-Samin. Assad scowled down upon her, for he had not yet recovered from the resentment she and Marzak had provoked in him. Moreover, that in private she should be lacking in the respect which was his due was evil enough, though he had tolerated it, but that she should make so bold as to thrust in and question him in this peremptory fashion, before all the world, was more than his dignity could suffer. Never yet had she dared so much, nor would she have dared now, but that her sudden anxiety had effaced all caution from her mind. She had seen the look with which Assad had been considering that lovely slave, and not only jealousy, but positive fear awoke in her. Her hold upon Assad was growing tenuous. To snap it utterly no more was necessary than that he who of late years had scarce bestowed a thought or glance upon a woman should be taken with a fancy to bring some new recruit to his harem. Hence her desperate, reckless courage to stand thus before him now. For although her face was veiled, there was hearty arrogance in every line of her figure. Of his scowl, she took no slightest heed. "If this be the slave fetched by Sakro Bar from England, then rumor has lied to me," she said. "I vow it was scarce worth so long a voyage and the endangering so many valuable Muslim lives to fetch this yellow-faced, long-shanked daughter of perdition into Barbary." Assad's surprise beat down his anger. He was not subtle. "Yellow-faced? Long-shanked," quoth he. Then reading Fensley at last, he displayed a slow, crooked smile. "Already have I observed thee to grow hard of hearing, and now thy sight is failing too, it seems. Assuredly thou art growing old." And he looked her over with such an eye of displeasure that she recoiled. He stepped close up to her. "Too long already hast thou queened in my harem with thine infidel, Frankish ways," he muttered, so that none but those immediately about overheard his angry words. "Thou art become a very scandal in the eyes of the faithful," he added very grimly. "It were well, perhaps, that we amended that." Abruptly then he turned away, and by a gesture he ordered Ali to return the slave to her place among the others. Leaning on the arm of Samani, he took some steps toward the entrance, then halted, and turned again to Fenzeli. "To thy litter," he bade her peremptorily, rebuking her thus before all, "and get thee to the house as becomes a seemly Muslim woman, nor ever again let thyself be seen roving the public places afoot." She obeyed him instantly, without a murmur, and he himself lingered at the gates with Samani until her litter had passed out, escorted by Ayyub and Marzak walking each on one side of it, and neither daring to meet the angry eye of the Basha. Assad looked sourly after that litter, a sneer on his heavy lips. "As her beauty wanes, so her presumption waxes," he growled. "She is growing old, Samani, old and lean and shrewish, and no fit mate for a member of the Prophet's house. It were perhaps a pleasing thing in the sight of Allah that we replaced her." And then, referring obviously to that other one, his eye turning toward the penthouse, the curtains of which were drawn again, he changed his tone. "Didst thou mark, O Tsamani, with what a grace she moved, lively and nobly as a young gazelle? Verily, so much beauty was never created by the All-Wise to be cast into the pit. May it not have been sent to comfort some true believer?" wondered the subtle Wazir. "To Allah all things are possible." "Why else, indeed," said Assad. "It was written, and even as none may obtain what is not written, so none may avoid what is. I am resolved. Stay thou here, Tsamanni. Remain for the outcry and purchase her. She shall be taught the true faith. She shall be saved from the furnace. The command had come, the thing that Tsamanni had so ardently desired. He licked his lips. "And the price, my lord?" he asked in a small voice. "Price," quoth Asad. "Have I not bid thee purchase her? Bring her to me, though her price be 1,000 philips." 8,000 philips, echoed Tsamanni amazed. Allah is great. But already Asad had left his side and passed out under the arched gate, with a groveling anew at the sight of him. It was a fine thing for Asad to bid him remain for the sale. But the Dalal would part with no slave until the money was forthcoming, and Tsamanni had no considerable sum upon his person. Therefore, in the wake of his master, he set out forthwith to the Kasbah. It wanted still an hour before the sale would be held, and he had time and to spare in which to go and return. It happened, however, that Tsamanni was malicious, and that the hatred of Fenzeli, which so long he consumed in silence and dissembled under fawning smiles and profound salams, included also her servants. There was none in all the world of whom he entertained a greater contempt than her sleek and greasy eunuch Ayyub el-Samin, of the majestic, rolling gait and fat, supercilious lips. It was written, too, that in the courtyard of the Kasbah he should stumble upon Ayyub, who indeed had by his mistress's commands been set to watch for the Wazir. The fat fellow rolled forward, his hand supporting his paunch, his little eyes agleam. "Allah increase thy health, Tsamanni," was his courteous greeting. "Thou bearest news?" "News? What news?" quoth Tsamanni. "In truth none that will gladden thy mistress." "Merciful Allah, what now? Doth it concern that Frankish slave girl?" Tsamanni smiled, a thing that angered Ayyub, who felt that the ground he trod was becoming insecure. It followed that if his mistress fell from influence, he fell with her, and became as the dust upon Tsamanni's slippers. "By the Koran thou tremblest, Ayyub." Tsamanni mocked him. "Thy soft fat is all a quivering, and well it may, for thy days are numbered, O father of nothing. Dost deride me, dog?" Came the other's voice, shrill now with anger. "Cayes me, dog? Thou!" Deliberately Tsamanni spat upon his shadow. "Go, tell thy mistress that I am bidden by my lord to buy the Frankish girl. Tell her that my lord will take her to wife, even as he took Fenzeli, that he may lead her into the true belief and cheat Shaitan of so fair a jewel. Add that I am bidden to buy her, though she cost my lord 1,000 philips. Bear her that message, O father wind, and may Allah increase thy paunch." And he was gone, lithe, active, and mocking. "May thy sons perish and thy daughters become harlots," roared the eunuch, maddened at once by this evil news and the insult with which it was accompanied. But Tsamanni only laughed, as he answered him over his shoulder, "May thy sons be sultans all, Ayyub." Quivering still with a rage that entirely obliterated his alarm at what he had learnt, Ayyub rode into the presence of his mistress with that evil message. She listened to him in a dumb white fury. Then she fell to reviling her lord and the slave girl in a breath, and called upon Allah to break their bones and blacken their faces, and rot their flesh with all the fervor of one born and bred in the true faith. When she recovered from that burst of fury, it was to sit brooding a while. At length she sprang up and bade Ayyub see that none lurked to listen about the doorways. "We must act, Ayyub, and act swiftly, or I am destroyed, and with me will be destroyed Marzak, who alone could not stand against his father's face. Sakr el-Bahr will trample us into the dust." She checked on a sudden thought. By Allah, it may have been a part of his design to have brought hither that white-faced wench. But we must thwart him, and we must thwart Asad, or thou art ruined too, Ayyub. "Thwart him," quoth her Wazir, gaping at the swift energy of mind and body with which this woman was endowed, the like of which he had never seen in any woman yet. "Thwart him," he repeated. "First, Ayyub, to place this Frankish girl beyond his reach." "That is well thought, but how? How? Can thy wit suggest no way? Hast thou wits at all in that fat head of thine? Thou shalt outbid Tsamanni, or better still, set someone else to do it for thee, and so buy the girl for me. Then we'll contrive that she shall vanish quietly and quickly before Asad can discover a trace of her." His face blanched, and the wattles about his jaws were shaking. "And then the cost? Hast thou counted the cost? O Fenzeli, what will happen when Asad gains knowledge of this thing?" He shall gain no knowledge of it, she answered him. Or if he does, the girl being gone beyond recall, he shall submit him to what was written. Trust me to know how to bring him to it. Lady, lady, he cried, and wrung his bunches of fat fingers. I dare not engage in this. Engage in what? If I bid thee go by this girl, and give thee the money thou wilt require, what else concerns thee, dog? What else is to be done? A man shall do. Come now. Thou shalt have the money, all I have, which is a matter of some 1,500 philips, and what is not laid out upon this purchase thou shalt retain for thyself. He considered an instant, and conceived that she was right. None could blame him for executing the command she gave him, and there would be profit in it. Clearly. Aye, and it would be sweet to outbid that dog Samani and send him empty-handed home to face the wrath of his frustrated master. He spread his hands and salaamed in token of complete acquiescence. Chapter 10, The Slave Market. At the Sak El Abid, it was the hour of the outcry, announced by a blast of trumpets and the thudding of tom-toms. The traders that until then had been licensed to ply within the enclosure now put up the shutters of their little booths. The Hebrew peddler of gems closed his box and effaced himself, leaving the steps about the well clear for the most prominent patrons of the market. These hastened to assemble there, surrounding it and facing outwards, whilst the rest of the crowd was ranged against the southern and western walls of the enclosure. Came Negro water carriers in white turbans with aspersers made of palmetto leaves to sprinkle the ground and lay the dust against the tramp of slaves and buyers. The trumpets ceased for an instant, then wound a fresh imperious blast and fell permanently silent. The crowd about the gates fell back to right and left, and very slowly and stately 3 tall dalals, dressed from head to foot in white and with immaculate turbans wooed about their heads, advanced into the open space. They came to a halt at the western end of the long wall, the chief dalal standing slightly in advance of the other 2. The chattering of voices sank upon their advent. It became a hissing whisper, then a faint drone like that of bees, and then utter silence. In the solemn and grave demeanor of the dalals, there was something almost sacerdotal, so that when that silence fell upon the crowd, the affair took on the aspect of a sacrament. The chief dalal stood forward a moment as if in an abstraction with downcast eyes. Then with hands outstretched to catch a blessing, he raised his voice and began to pray in a monotonous chant. In the name of Allah, the pitying, the pitiful, who created man from clots of blood, all that is in the heavens and in the earth praiseth Allah, who is the mighty, the wise. His the kingdom of the heavens and of the earth. He mocketh alive and killeth, and he hath power over all things. He is the first and the last, the seen and the unseen, and he knoweth all things. Ameen, intoned the crowd. The praise to him who sent us Muhammad his prophet to give the world the true belief, and curses upon Shaitan the stoned who wages war upon Allah and his children. Ameen. The blessings of Allah and our Lord Muhammad upon this market and upon all who may buy and sell herein, and may Allah increase their wealth and grant them length of days in which to praise him. Ameen, replied the crowd, as with a stir and rustle the close ranks relaxed from the tense attitude of prayer, and each man sought elbow room. The dalal beat his hands together, whereupon the curtains were drawn aside and the huddled slaves displayed, some 300 in all, occupying 3 several pens. In the front rank of the middle pen, the one containing Rosamund and Lionel, stood a couple of stalwart young Nubians, sleek and muscular, who looked on with completest indifference, nowhat appalled by the fate which had haled them thither. They caught the eye of the dalal, and although the usual course was for a buyer to indicate a slave he was prepared to purchase, yet to the end that good beginning should be promptly made, the dalal himself pointed out that stalwart pair to the corsairs who stood on guard. In compliance, the 2 Negroes were brought forth. Here is a noble twain, the dalal announced, strong of muscle and long of limb, as all may see, whom it were a shameful thing to separate. Who needs such a pair for strong labor? Let him say what he will give. He set out on a slow circuit of the well, the corsairs urging the 2 slaves to follow him that all buyers might see and inspect them. In the foremost ranks of the crowd near the gate stood Ali, sent thither by Othmani to purchase a score of stout fellows required to make up the contingent of the galliasse of Sakr el-Bahr. He had been strictly enjoined to buy naught but the stoutest stuff the market could afford, with one exception. Aboard that galliasse they wanted no weaklings who would trouble the boatswain with their swoonings. Ali announced his business forthwith. I need such tall fellows for the oars of Sakura Bar, said he with loud importance, thus drawing upon himself the eyes of the assembly, and sunning himself in the admiring looks bestowed upon one of the officers of Oliver Reese, one of the rovers who had the pride of Islam and a sword edge to the infidel. They were born to toil nobly at the oar. O Ali Reese, replied the Dalal in all solemnity, what wilt thou give for them? 200 Philips for the twain. The Dalal pays solemnly on, the slaves following in his wake. 200 Philips am I offered for a pair of the loustiest slaves that by the favor of Allah were ever brought into this market. Who will say 50 Philips more? A portly Moor in a flowing blue selham rose from his seat on the step of the well as the Dalal came abreast of him, and the slaves, sending here a buyer, and preferring any service to that of the galleys with which they were threatened, came each in turn to kiss his hands and fawn upon him. For all the world like dogs. Calm and dignified, he ran his hands over them, feeling their muscles, and then forced back their lips and examined their teeth and mouths. 220 for the twain, he said, and the Dalal passed on with his wares, announcing the increased price he had been offered. Thus he completed the circuit, and came to stand once more before Ali. 220 is now the price. O Ali, by the Koran, they are worth 300 at the least. Wilt say 300? 230 was the answer. Back to the Moor went the Dalal. 230 I am now offered. O Hamid, thou wilt give another 20. Not I, by Allah, said Hamid, and resumed his seat. Let him have them. Another 10 Philips, pleaded the Dalal. Not another asper. They are thine, then, O Ali, for 230. Give thanks to Allah for so good a bargain. The Nubians were surrendered to Ali's followers, whilst the Dalal's 2 assistants advanced to settle accounts with the corsair. Wait, said he, is not the name of Sakura Bar good warranty? The inviolable law is that the purchase money be paid ere a slave leaves the market, O valiant Ali. It shall be observed, was the impatient answer, and I will so pay before they leave. But I want others yet, and we will make one account and it please thee. That fellow yonder now, I have orders to buy him for my captain. And he indicated Lionel, who stood at Rosamund's side, the very incarnation of woefulness and debility. Contemptuous surprise flickered an instant in the eyes of the Dalal. But this he made haste to dissemble. Bring forth that yellow-haired infidel, he commanded. The corsairs laid hands on Lionel. He made a vain attempt to struggle, but it was observed that the woman leaned over to him and said something quickly, whereupon his struggle ceased, and he suffered himself to be dragged limply forth into the full view of all the market. Das wanted for the oar, Ali? Cried a Ubel Samin across the quadrangle, a gestus that evoked a general laugh. What else? Quoth Ali. He should be cheap at least. Cheap, quoth the Dalal in an affectation of surprise. Nay, now. 'Tis a comely fellow and a young one. What wilt thou give, now? 100 Philips. 100 Philips, cried Ali derisively. 100 Philips for that skinful of bones. Mas Allah, 5 Philips is my price. O Dalal. Again laughter crackled through the mob, but the Dalal stiffened with increasing dignity. Some of that laughter seemed to touch himself, and he was not a person to be made the butt of mirth. 'Tis a jest, my master, said he, with a forgiving yet contemptuous wave. Behold how sound he is. He signed to one of the corsairs, and Lionel's doublet was slit from neck to girdle and wrenched away from his body, leaving him naked to the waist, and displaying better proportions than might have been expected. In a passion at that indignity, Lionel writhed in the grip of his guards, until one of the corsairs struck him a light blow with a whip in earnest of what to expect if he continued to be troublesome. Consider him now, said the Dalal, pointing to that white torso, and behold how sound he is. See how excellent are his teeth. He seized Lionel's head and forced the jaws apart. Aye, said Ali, but consider me those lean shanks in that woman's arm. 'Tis a fault thee will mend, the Dalal insisted. You filthy blackamoors, burst from Lionel in a sob of rage. He is muttering curses in his infidel tongue, said Ali. His temper is none too good, you see. I have said 5 Philips. I'll say no more. With a shrug, the Dalal began his circuit of the well, the corsairs thrusting Lionel after him. Here one rose to handle him, there another, but none seemed disposed to purchase. 5 Philips is the foolish price offered me for this fine young Frank, cried the Dalal. Will no true believer pay 10 for such a slave? Wilt not thou, O Ayub? Thou Hammett 10 Philips. But one after another those to whom he was offered shook their heads. The haggardness of Lionel's face was too unprepossessing. They had seen slaves with that look before, and experience told them that no good was ever to be done with such fellows. Moreover, though shapely, his muscles were too slight, his flesh looked too soft and tender. Of what use a slave who must be hardened and nourished into strength, and who might very well die in the process? Even at 5 Philips he would be dear. So the disgusted Dalal came back to Ali. He is thine, then, for 5 Philips, Allah pardon thy avarice. Ali grinned, and his men seized upon Lionel, and bore him off into the background to join the 2 Negroes previously purchased. And then, before Ali could bid for another of the slaves he desired to acquire, a tall, elderly Jew, dressed in black doublet and hose like a Castilian gentleman, with a ruffle at his neck, a plumed bonnet on his gray locks, and a serviceable dagger hanging from his girdle of hammered gold, had claimed the attention of the Dalal. In the pen that held the captives of the lesser raids conducted by Biscayne sat an Andalusian girl of perhaps some 20 years, of a beauty entirely Spanish. Her face was of the warm pallor of ivory, her massed hair an ebony black, her eyebrows were finely penciled, and her eyes of deepest and softest brown. She was dressed in the becoming garb of the Castilian peasant, the folded kerchief of red and yellow above her bodice, leaving bare the glories of her neck. She was very pale, and her eyes were wild in their look, but this detracted nothing from her beauty. She had attracted the Jew's notice, and it is not impossible that there may have stirred in him a desire to avenge upon her some of the cruel wrongs, some of the rackings, burning, confiscations, and banishments suffered by the men of his race at the hands of the men of hers. He may have bethought him of invaded ghettos, of Jewish maidens ravished, and Jewish children butchered in the name of the God those Spanish Christians worshipped. For there was something almost of contemptuous fierceness in his dark eyes, and in the hand he flung out to indicate her. Yonder is a Castilian, one for whom I will give 50 Philips. O Dalal, he announced. The daedal made a sign, whereupon the corsairs dragged her struggling forth. So much loveliness may not be bought for 50 Philips. O Ibrahim, said he, Yusuf here will pay 60 at least. And he stood expectantly before a resplendent Moor. The Moor, however, shook his head. Allah knows I have 3 wives who destroy her loveliness within the hour and so leave me the loser. The Dalal moved on, the girl following him but contesting every step of the way with those who impelled her forward, and reviling them too in hot Castilian. She drove her nails into the arms of one and spat fiercely into the face of another of her corsair guards. Rosamund's weary eyes quickened to horror as she watched her, a horror prompted as much by the fate awaiting that poor child as by the undignified fury of the futile battle she waged against it. But it happened that her behavior impressed a Levantine Turk quite differently. He rose, a short, squat figure, from his seat on the steps of the well. 60 Philips will I pay for the joy of taming that wild cat, said he. But Ibrahim was not to be outbid then. He offered 70. The Turk countered with a bid of 80, and Ibrahim again raised the price to 90, and there fell a pause. The Dalal spurred on the Turk. Wilt thou be beaten then, and by an Israelite? Shall this lovely maid be given to a perverter of the Scriptures, to an inheritor of the fire, to one of a race that would not bestow on their fellow men so much as a speck out of a date stone? It were a shame upon a true believer. Urged thus, the Turk offered another 5 Philips, but with obvious reluctance. The Jew, however, entirely unabashed by a tirade against him, the like of which he heard a score times a day in the course of trading, pulled forth a heavy purse from his girdle. Here are 100 Philips, he announced. 'Tis overmuch, but I offer it. Ere the Dalal's pious and seductive tongue could urge him further, the Turk sat down again with a gesture of finality. I give him joy of her, said he. She is thine, then, O Ibrahim, for 100 Philips. The Israelite relinquished the purse to the Dalal's white-robed assistants and advanced to receive the girl. The corsairs thrust her forward against him, still vainly battling, and his arms closed about her for a moment. Thou hast cost me dear, thou daughter of Spain, said he, but I am content. Come. And he made shift to lead her away. Suddenly, however, fierce as a tiger cat, she writhed her arms upwards and clawed at his face. With a scream of pain, he relaxed his hold of her, and in that moment, Quick as lightning, she plucked the dagger that hung from his girdle so temptingly within her reach. "Valga me Dios," she cried, and ere a hand could be raised to prevent her, she had buried the blade in her lovely breast and sank in a laughing, coughing heap at his feet. A final convulsive heave, and she lay there quite still, whilst Ibrahim glared down at her with eyes of dismay, and over all the market there hung a hush of sudden awe. Rosamund had risen in her place, and a faint color came to warm her pallor. A faint light kindled in her eyes. God had shown her the way through this poor Spanish girl, and assuredly God would give her the means to take it when her own turn came. She felt herself suddenly uplifted and enheartened. Death was a sharp, swift severing, an easy door of escape from the horror that threatened her, and God in his mercy, she knew, would justify self-murder under such circumstances as were her own and that poor dead Andalusian maid's. At length Ibrahim roused himself from his momentary stupor. He stepped deliberately across the body, his face inflamed, and stood to beard the impassive Dalal. "She is dead," he bleated. "I am defrauded. Give me back my gold." "Are we to give back the price of every slave that dies?" The Dalal questioned him. "But she was not yet delivered to me," raved the Jew. "My hands had not touched her. Give me back my gold." "Thou least son of a dog," was the answer, dispassionately delivered. "She was thine already. I had so pronounced her. Bear her hence, since she belongs to thee." The Jew, his face empurpling, seemed to fight for breath. "How?" he choked. "Am I to lose 100 philips?" "What is written," replied the serene Dalal. Ibrahim was frothing at the lips. His eyes were blood-injected. "But it was never written that." "Peace," said the Dalal. "Had it not been written, it could not have come to pass. It is the will of Allah. Who dares rebel against it?" The crowd began to murmur. "I want my 100 philips," the Jew insisted, whereupon the murmur swelled into a sudden roar. "Thou hearest," said the Dalal. "Allah pardon thee. Thou art disturbing the peace of this market. Away, ere betide thee." "Hence! Hence!" roared the crowd, and some advanced threateningly upon the luckless Ibrahim. "Away, thou perverter of holy writ! Thou filth! Thou dog! Away!" Such was the uproar, such the menace of angry countenances and clenched fists shaken in his very face, that Ibrahim quailed and forgot his loss in fear. I go," he said, and turned hastily to depart. But the Dalal summoned him back. "Take hence thy property," said he, and pointed to the body. And so Ibrahim was forced to suffer the further mockery of summoning his slaves to bear away the lifeless body for which he had paid in lively, potent gold. Yet by the gates he paused again. "I will appeal me to the Basha," he threatened. "Asad ad-Din is just, and he will have my money restored to me." "So he will," said the Dalal, "when thou canst restore the dead to life." And he turned to the portly Ayyub, who was plucking at his sleeve. He bent his head to catch the muttered words of Fenzilia's wazir. Then, in obedience to them, he ordered Rosamund to be brought forward. She offered no least resistance, advancing in a singularly lifeless way, like a sleepwalker or one who had been drugged. In the heat and glare of the open market, she stood by the Dalal's side at the head of the well, whilst he dilated upon her physical merits in that lingua franca which he used since it was current coin among all the assorted races represented there, a language which the knowledge of French that her residence in France had taught her she was to her increasing horror and shame able to understand. The first to make an offer for her was that same portly Moor who had sought to purchase the 2 Nubians. He rose to scrutinize her closely, and must have been satisfied, for the price he offered was a good one, and he offered it with contemptuous assurance that he would not be outbid then. 100 philips for the milk-faced girl. "'Tis not enough. Consider me the moon-bright loveliness of her face," said the Dalal as he moved on. "Chigil yields us fair women, but no woman of Chigil was ever half so fair." 150, said the Levantine Turk with a snap. "Not yet enough. Behold the stately height which Allah hath vouchsafed her. See the noble carriage of her head, the luster of her eye. By Allah, she is worthy to grace the Sultan's own harem." He said no more than the buyers recognized to be true, and excitement stirred faintly through their usually impassive ranks. A Tagareen Moor named Yusuf offered at once 200, but still the Dalal continued to sing her praises. He held up one of her arms for inspection, and she submitted with lowered eyes and no sign of resentment beyond the slow flush that spread across her face and vanished again. Behold me these limbs, smooth as Arabian silks and whiter than ivory. Look at those lips like pomegranate blossoms. The price is now 200 philips. What wilt thou give, O Hamlet? Hamlet showed himself angry that his original bid should so speedily have been doubled. By the Koran, I have purchased 3 sturdy girls from the Sus for less. Wouldst thou compare a squat-faced girl from the Sus with this narcissus-eyed glory of womanhood? Scoffed the Dalal. The watchful Tsamanni considered that the time had come to buy her for his lord as he had been bidden. 300, he said curtly, to make an end of matters, and 400, instantly piped a shrill voice behind him. He spun round in his amazement and met the leering face of Ayyub. A murmur ran through the ranks of the buyers. The people craned their necks to catch a glimpse of this open-handed purchaser. Yusuf the Tagareen rose up in a passion. He announced angrily that never again should the dust of the sock of Algiers defile his slippers, that never again would he come there to purchase slaves. By the well of Zemzem, he swore, all men are bewitched in this market. 400 philips for a Frankish girl. May Allah increase your wealth, for verily you'll need it. And in a supreme disgust, he stalked to the gates and elbowed his way through the crowd, and so vanished from the sock. Yet ere he was out of earshot, her price had risen further. While Tsamanni was recovering from his surprise at the competitor that had suddenly appeared before him, the Dalal had lured an increased offer from the Turk. "'Tis a madness," the latter deplored. "But she pleaseth me, and should it seem good Allah the Merciful to lead her into the true faith, she may yet become the light of my harem. 420 philips, then, O Dalal, and Allah pardon me my prodigality." Yet scarcely was his little speech concluded than Tsamanni with laconic eloquence rapped out, 500. "Yalla!" cried the Turk, raising his hands to heaven, and "Yalla!" echoed the crowd. 550, shrilled Ayyub's voice above the general din. 600, replied Tsamanni, still unmoved. And now such was the general hubbub provoked by these unprecedented prices that the Dalal was forced to raise his voice and cry for silence. When this was restored, Ayyub at once raised the price to 700. 800, snapped Tsamanni, showing at last a little heat. 900, replied Ayyub. Tsamanni swung round upon him again, white now with fury. "Is this a jest, O father wind?" he cried, an excited laughter by the taunt implicit in that appellation. "And thou art he the jester," replied Ayyub with forced calm. "Thou wilt he find the jest a costly one." With a shrug, Tsamanni turned again to the Dalal. 1,000 philips, said he shortly. "Silence there," cried the Dalal again. "Silence, and praise Allah who sends good prices." 1,100, said Ayyub the irrepressible. And now Tsamanni not only found himself outbid then, but he had reached the outrageous limit appointed by Assad. He lacked authority to go further, dared not do so without first consulting the Basha. Yet if he left the sock for that purpose, Ayyub would meanwhile secure the girl. He found himself between sword and wall. On the one hand, did he permit himself to be outbid, then his master might visit upon him his disappointment. On the other, did he continue beyond the limit, so idly mentioned as being far beyond all possibility, it might fare no less ill with him. He turned to the crowd, waving his arms in furious gesticulation. "By the beard of the Prophet, this bladder of wind and grease makes sport of us. He has no intent to buy. What man ever heard of the half of such a price for a slave girl?" Ayyub's answer was eloquent. He produced a fat bag and flung it on the ground, where it fell with a mellow chink. "There is my sponsor," he made answer, grinning in the very best of humors, savoring to full his enemy's rage and discomfiture, and savoring it at no cost himself. "Shall I count out 1,100 philips? O Dalal, if the Wazer Tsamanni is content." "Dost thou know for whom I buy?" roared Tsamanni. "For the Basha himself, Asad ad-Din, the exalted of Allah." He advanced upon Ayyub with hands upheld. "What shalt thou say to him, O dog, when he calls it to account for daring to outbid him?" But Ayyub remained unruffled before all this fury. He spread his fat hands, his eyes twinkling, his great lips pursed. "How should I know, since Allah has not made me all-knowing? Thou shouldst have said so earlier. 'Tis thus I shall answer the Basha should he question me, and the Basha is just. I would not be thee, Ayub, not for the throne of Istanbul, nor I thee, Tsammani, for thou art jaundiced with rage. And so they stood glaring each at the other until the Dalal called them back to the business that was to do. The price is now 1,100 Philips. Wilt thou suffer defeat, O Wazer? Since Allah wills, I have no authority to go further. Then at 1,100 Philips, Ayub, she is. But the sale was not yet to be completed. From the dense and eager throng about the gates rang a crisp voice. 1,200 Philips for the Frankish girl. The Dalal, who had conceived that the limits of madness had been already reached, stood gaping now in fresh amazement. The mob crowed and cheered and roared between enthusiasm and derision, and even Tsammani brightened to see another champion enter the list who perhaps would avenge him upon Ayub. The crowd parted quickly to right and left, and through it into the open strode Sakr el-Bahr. They recognized him instantly, and his name was shouted in acclamation by that idolizing multitude. That Barbary name of his conveyed no information to Rosamond, and her back being turned to the entrance, she did not see him, but she had recognized his voice, and she had shuddered at the sound. She could make nothing of the bidding, nor what the purpose that surely underlay to account for the extraordinary excitement of the traders. Vaguely had she been wondering what dastardly purpose Oliver might intend to serve, but now that she heard his voice, that wonder ceased, and understanding took its place. He had hung there somewhere in the crowd waiting until all competitors, but one should have been outbid then, and now he stepped forth to buy her for his own, his slave. She closed her eyes a moment and prayed God that he might not prevail in his intent. Any fate but that. She would rob him even of the satisfaction of driving her to see the poniard in her heart, as that poor Andalusian girl had done. A wave almost of unconsciousness passed over her in the intensity of her horror. For a moment the ground seemed to rock and heave under her feet. Then the dizziness passed, and she was herself again. She heard the crowd thundering Masjid Allah and Sakr el-Bahr, and the Dalal clamoring sternly for silence. When this was at last restored, she heard his exclamation, "The glory to Allah who sends eager buyers. What sayest thou, O Wazer Ayub?" "Aye," sneered Tsammani. "What now?" 1,300, said Ayub with a quaver of uneasy defiance. "Another 100, O Dalal," came from Sakr el-Bahr in a quiet voice. 1,500, screamed Ayub, thus reaching not only the limit imposed by his mistress, but the very limit of the resources at her immediate disposal. Gone, too, with that bid was all hope of profit to himself. But Sakr el-Bahr, impassive as fate, and without so much as deigning to bestow a look upon the quivering eunuch, said again, "Another 100, O Dalal." 1,600 Philips, cried the Dalal, more in amazement than to announce the figure reached. Then, controlling his emotions, he bowed his head in reverence and made confession of his faith. All things are possible if Allah wills them. The praise to him who sends wealthy buyers. He turned to the crestfallen Ayub, so crestfallen that in the contemplation of him Tsammani was fast gathering consolation for his own discomfiture, vicariously tasting the sweets of vengeance. "What say you now, O perspicuous Wazer?" "I say," choked Ayub, "that since by the favor of Shaitan he has so much wealth, he must prevail." But the insulting words were scarcely uttered than Sakr el-Bahr's great hand had taken the Wazer by the nape of his fat neck, a growl of anger running through the assembly to approve him. "By the favor of Shaitan, sayest thou, thou sexless dog," he growled, and tightened his grip so that the Wazer squirmed and twisted in an agony of pain. Down was his head thrust, and still down, until his fat body gave way and he lay supine and writhing in the dust of Sak. "Shall I strangle thee, thou father of filth, or shall I fling thy soft flesh to the hooks to teach thee what is a man's due from thee?" And as he spoke, he rubbed the two daring fellows' face roughly on the ground. "Mercy!" squealed the Wazer. "Mercy, O mighty Sakr el-Bahr, as thou lookest for mercy. Unsay thy words, thou awful. Pronounce thyself a liar and a dog. I do unsay them. I have foully lied. Thy wealth is a reward sent thee by Allah for thy glorious victories over the unbelieving. Put out thine offending tongue," said Sakr el-Bahr, "and cleanse in the dust. Put it forth, I say." Ayub obeyed him in fearful alacrity, whereupon Sakr el-Bahr released his hold and allowed the unfortunate fellow to rise at last, half choked with dirt, livid of face, and quaking like a jelly, an object of ridicule and cruel mockery to all assembled. Now get thee hence, ere my sea hawks lay their talons on thee. Go! Ayub departed in all haste to the increasing jeers of the multitude and the taunts of Samani, while Sakrobar turned him once more to the Dalal. At 1,600 Philips this slave is thine, O Sakrobar, thou glory of Islam. May Allah increase thy victories. Pay him, Ali, said the corsair shortly, and he advanced to receive his purchase. Face to face stood he now with Rosamund. For the first time since that day before the encounter with the Dutch argosy, when he had sought her in the cabin of the Carrack. One swift glance she bestowed on him. Then, her senses reeling with horror at her circumstance, she shrank back, her face of a deathly pallor. In his treatment of Ayub, she had just witnessed the lengths of brutality of which he was capable, and she was not to know that this brutality had been a deliberate piece of mummery calculated to strike terror into her. Pondering her now, he smiled a tight-lipped, cruel smile that only served to increase her terror. "Come," he said in English. She cowered back against the Dalal, as if for protection. Sakrobar reached forward, caught her by the wrists, and almost tossed her to his Nubians, Abayad and Zalzur, who were attending him. "Cover her face," he bade them. "Bear her to my house." Away! Chapter 11. The Truth. The sun was dipping swiftly to the world's rim when Sakrobar, with his Nubians and his little retinue of corsairs, came to the gates of that white house of his on its little eminence outside the battle web and beyond the walls of the city. When Rosamund and Lionel, brought in the wake of the corsair, found themselves in the spacious courtyard beyond the dark and narrow entrance, the blue of the sky contained but the paling embers of the dying day, and suddenly, sharply upon the evening stillness, came a mueddin's voice calling the faithful unto prayer. Slaves fetched water from the fountain that played in the middle of the quadrangle and tossed aloft a slender silvery spear of water to break into a myriad gems, and so showered down into the broad marble basin. Sakrobar washed, as did his followers, and then he went down upon the praying mat that had been set for him, whilst his corsairs detached their cloaks and spread them upon the ground to serve them in like stead. The Nubians turned the two slaves about, lest their glances should defile the orisons of the faithful, and left them so facing the wall and the green gate that led into the garden, whence were wafted on the cooling air the perfumes of jessamine and lavender. Through the lattice of the gate, they might have caught a glimpse of the riot of color there, and they might have seen the slaves arrested by the Persian water wheel, at which they had been toiling and chanting until the call to prayer had come to strike them into statues. Sakrobar rose from his devotions, uttered a sharp word of command, and entered the house. The Nubians followed him, urging their captives before them up the narrow stairs, and so brought them out upon the terrace on the roof, that space which in Eastern houses is devoted to the women, but which no woman's foot had ever trodden since this house had been tenanted by Sakrobar the wifeless. This terrace, which was surrounded by a parapet some 4 feet high, commanded a view of the city straggling up the hillside to eastward, from the harbor and the island at the end of the mole, which had been so laboriously built by the labor of Christian slaves from the stones of the ruined fortress. The pennon, which Caerdin Barbarossa had wrested from the Spaniards. The deepening shroud of evening was now upon all, transmuting white and yellow walls alike to a pearly grayness. To westward stretched the fragrant gardens of the house, where the doves were murmuring fondly among the mulberries and lotus trees. Beyond, a valley wound its way between the shallow hills, and from a pool fringed with sedges and bulrushes, above which a great stork was majestically sailing, came the harsh croak of frogs. An awning supported upon 2 gigantic spears hung out from the southern wall of the terrace, which rose to twice the height of that forming the parapet on its other 3 sides. Under this was a divan and silken cushions, and near a small Moorish table of ebony, inlaid with mother of pearl and gold. Over the opposite parapet, where a lattice had been set, rioted a trailing rose tree charged with blood-red blossoms, though now their colors were merged into the all-encompassing grayness. Here Lionel and Rosamund looked at each other in the dim light, their faces gleaming ghostly each to each, whilst the Nubians stood like twin statues by the door that opened from the stairhead. The man groaned and clasped his hands before him. The doublet, which had been torn from him in the sock, had since been restored and temporarily repaired by a strand of palmetto cord. But he was woefully bedraggled. Yet his thoughts, if his first words are to be taken as an indication of them, were for Rosamund's condition rather than his own. "Oh, God, that you should be subjected to this," he cried. "That you should have suffered what you have suffered. The humiliation of it. The barbarous cruelty. Oh!" He covered his haggard face with his hands. She touched him gently on the arm. "What I have suffered is but a little thing," she said, and her voice was wonderfully steady and soothing. "Have I not said that these Godolphins were brave folk? Even their women were held to have something of the male spirit in their breasts. And to this none can doubt that Rosamond now bore witness. Do not pity me, Lionel, for my sufferings are at an end or very nearly." She smiled strangely, the smile of exultation that you may see upon the martyr's face in the hour of doom. "How?" quoth he in faint surprise. "How?" she echoed. "Is there not always a way to thrust aside life's burden when it grows too heavy, heavier than God would have us bear?" His only answer was a groan. Indeed, he had done little but groan in all the hours they had spent together since they were brought ashore from the Carrack, and had the season permitted her so much reflection, she might have considered that she had found him singularly wanting during those hours of stress when a man of worth would have made some effort, however desperate, to enhearten her rather than repine upon his own plight. Slaves entered bearing 4 enormous flaming torches, which they set in iron sconces protruding from the wall of the house. Thence they shed a lurid ruddy glow upon the terrace. The slaves departed again, and presently, in the black gap of the doorway between the Nubians, a third figure appeared unheralded. It was Sakr el Bahr. He stood a moment at gaze, his attitude haughty, his face expressionless. Then slowly he advanced. He was dressed in a short white caftan that descended to his knees, and was caught about his waist in a shimmering girdle of gold that quivered like fire in the glow of the torches as he moved. His arms from the elbow and his legs from the knee were bare, and his feet were shod with gold-embroidered red Turkish slippers. He wore a white turban decked by a plume of osprey attached by a jewel clasp. He signed to the Nubians, and they vanished silently, leaving him alone with his captives. He bowed to Rosamond. "This, mistress," he said, "is to be your domain henceforth, which is to treat you more as wife than slave. For it is to Muslim wives that the housetops in Barbary are allotted. I hope you like it." Lionel staring at him out of a white face, his conscience bidding him fear the very worst, his imagination painting 1,000 horrid fates for him and turning him sick with dread, shrank back before his half-brother, who scarce appeared to notice him just then. But Rosamond confronted him, drawn to the full of her splendid height, and if her face was pale, yet was as composed and calm as his own. If her bosom rose and fell to betray her agitations, yet her glance was contemptuous and defiant, her voice calm and steady, when she answered him with a question. "What is your intent with me?" "My intent," said he with a little twisted smile. Yet for all that he believed he hated her and sought to hurt, to humble and to crush her, he could not stifle his admiration of her spirit's gallantry in such an hour as this. From behind the hills peeped the edge of the moon, a sickle of burnished copper. "My intent is not for you to question," he replied. "There was a time, Rosamond, when in all the world you had no slave more utter than was I. Yourself in your heartlessness and in your lack of faith, you broke the golden fetters of that servitude. You'll find it less easy to break the shackles I now impose upon you." She smiled her scorn in quiet confidence. He stepped close to her. "You are my slave. Do you understand? Bought in the marketplace as I might buy me a mule, a goat, or a camel, and belonging to me body and soul. You are my property, my thing, my chattel, to use or abuse, to cherish or break, as suits my whim, without a will that is not my will, holding your very life at my good pleasure." She recoiled a step before the dull hatred that throbbed in his words, before the evil mockery of his swarthy, bearded face. "You beast!" she gasped. "So now you understand the bondage into which you are come in exchange for the bondage which in your own wantonness you dissolved." "May God forgive you," she panted. "I thank you for that prayer," said he. "May he forgive you no less." And then from the background came an inarticulate sound, a strangled, snarling sob from Lionel. Sakr el Bahr turned slowly. He eyed the fellow a moment in silence. Then he laughed. "Ha, my sometime brother. A pretty fellow, as God lives, is it not? Consider him, Rosamond. Behold how gallantly misfortune is borne by this pillar of manhood upon which you would have leaned, by this stalwart husband of your choice. Look at him. Look at this dear brother mine." Under the lash of that mocking tongue Lionel's mood was stung to anger where before it had held naught but fear. You are no brother of mine, he retorted fiercely. Your mother was a wanton who betrayed my father. Sakura Bar quivered a moment as if he had been struck, yet he controlled himself. Let me hear my mother's name, but once again on thy foul tongue, and I'll have it ripped out by the roots. Her memory, I thank God, is far above the insults of such a crawling thing as you. Nonetheless, take care not to speak of the only woman whose name I reverence. And then turning at bay, as even the rat will do, Lionel sprang upon him, with clawing hands outstretched to reach his throat. But Sakura Bar caught him in a grip that bent him howling to his knees. You find me strong, eh? He jibed. Is it matter for wonder? Consider that for 6 endless months I toiled at the oar of a galley, and you'll understand what it was that turned my body into iron and robbed me of a soul. He flung him off and sent him crashing into the rose bush in the lattice over which it rambled. Do you realize the horror of the rower's bench? To sit day in day out, night in night out, chained naked to the oar, amid the reek and stench of your fellows in misfortune, unkempt, unwashed save by the rain, broiled and roasted by the sun, festering with sores, lashed and cut and scarred by the boatswain's whip as you faint under the ceaseless, endless, cruel toil. Do you realize it? From a tone of suppressed fury, his voice rose suddenly to a roar. You shall, for that horror which was mine by your contriving, shall now be yours until you die. He paused, but Lionel made no attempt to avail himself of this. His courage all gone out of him again, as suddenly as it flickered up, he cowered where he had been flung. Before you go, there is something else, Sakura Bar resumed, something for which I have had you brought hither tonight. Not content with having delivered me to all this, not content with having branded me a murderer, destroyed my good name, filched my possessions, and driven me into the very path of hell, you must further set about usurping my place in the false heart of this woman I once loved. I hope, he went on reflectively, that in your own poor way you love her too, Lionel. Thus to the torment that awaits your body shall be added torment for your treacherous soul, such torture mind as only the damned may know. To that end have I brought you hither, that you may realize something of what is in store for this woman at my hands, that you may take the thought of it with you to be to your mind worse than the boatswain's lash to your pampered body. You devil, snarled Lionel. Oh, you fiend out of hell. If you will manufacture devils, little toad of a brother, do not upbraid them for being devils when next you meet them. Give him no heed, Lionel, said Rosamund. I shall prove him as much a boaster as he has proved himself a villain. Never think that he will be able to work his evil will. 'Tis you are the boaster there, said Sakura Bar. And for the rest, I am what you and he between you have made me. Did we make you liar and coward? For that is what you are indeed, she answered. Coward, he echoed, in genuine surprise. 'Twill be some lie that he has told you with the others. In what, pray, was I ever coward? In what? In this that you do now, in this taunting and torturing of 2 helpless beings in our power. I speak not of what I am, he replied, for I have told you that I am what you have made me. I speak of what I was. I speak of the past. She looked at him, and she seemed to measure him with her unwavering glance. You speak of the past? She echoed, her voice low. You speak of the past, and to me? You dare. It is that we might speak of it together that I have fetched you all the way from England, that at last I may tell you things I was a fool to have kept from you 5 years ago, that we may resume a conversation which you interrupted when you dismissed me. I did you a monstrous injury, no doubt, she answered him with bitter irony. I was surely wanting in consideration. It would have become me better to have smiled and fawned upon my brother's murderer. I swore to you, then, that I was not his murderer, he reminded her in a voice that shook. And I answered you that you lied. And on that you dismissed me. The word of the man whom you profess to love, the word of the man to whom you had given your trust weighing for naught with you. When I gave you my trust, she retorted, I did so in ignorance of your true self, in a headstrong, willful ignorance that would not be guided by what all the world said of you and your wild ways. For that blind willfulness I have been punished, as perhaps I deserve to be. Lies, all lies, he stormed. Those ways of mine, and God knows they were none so wild, when all is said, I abandoned when I came to love you. No lover since the world began was ever so cleansed, so purified, so sanctified by love as was I. Spare me this at least, she cried on a note of loathing. Spare you, he echoed. What shall I spare you? The shame of it all. The shame that is ever mine in the reflection that for a season I believed I loved you. He smiled. If you can still feel shame, it shall overwhelm you ere I have done, for you shall hear me out. Here there are none to interrupt us, none to thwart my sovereign will. Reflect then, and remember what a pride you took in the change you had wrought in me. Your vanity welcomed that flattery, that tribute to the power of your beauty. Yet, all in a moment, upon the paltriest grounds, you believed me the murderer of your brother. The paltriest grounds, she cried, protesting almost despite herself. So paltry that the justices at Truro would not move against me. Because, she cut in, they accounted that you had been sufficiently provoked. Because you had not sworn to them, as you swore to me, that no provocation should ever drive you to raise your hand against my brother. Because they did not realize how false and how forsworn you were. He considered her a moment, then he took a turn on the terrace. Lionel, crouching ever by the rose tree, was almost entirely forgotten by him now. God, give me patience with you, he said at length. I need it, for I desire you to understand many things this night. I mean you to see how just is my resentment, how just the punishment that is to overtake you for what you have made of my life and perhaps of my hereafter. Just as Bain and another who is dead knew me for innocent. They knew you for innocent? There was scornful amazement in her tone. Were they not witnesses of the quarrel betwixt you and Peter, and of your oath that you would kill him? That was an oath sworn in the heat of anger. Afterwards I bethought me that he was your brother. Afterwards, said she, after you had murdered him? I say again, Oliver replied calmly, that I did not do this thing, and I say again that you lie. He considered her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Have you ever, he asked, known a man to lie without some purpose? Men lie for the sake of profit. They lie out of cowardice or malice, or else because they are vain and vulgar boasters. I know of no other causes that will drive a man to falsehood, save that, yes, and he flashed a sidelong glance at Lionel, save that sometimes a man will lie to shield another out of self-sacrifice. There you have all the spurs that urge a man to falsehood. Can any of these be urging me tonight? Reflect. Ask yourself what purpose I could serve by lying to you now. Consider further that I have come to loathe you for your unfaith, that I desire naught so much as to punish you for that, and for all its bitter consequences to me, that I have brought you hither to exact payment from you to the uttermost farthing. What end, then, can I serve by falsehood? All this being so, what end could you serve by truth? She countered. To make you realize to the full the injustice that you did, to make you understand the wrongs for which you are called to pay, to prevent you from conceiving yourself a martyr, to make you perceive in all its deadly bitterness that what now comes to you is the inevitable fruit of your own faithlessness. Sir Oliver, do you think me a fool? She asked him. Madam, I do, and worse, he answered. Aye, that is clear, she agreed scornfully, since even now you waste breath in attempting to persuade me against my reason. But words will not blot out facts. And though you talk from now till the day of judgment, no word of yours can efface those bloodstains in the snow that formed a trail from that poor murdered body to your own door. No word of yours can extinguish the memory of the hatred between him and you, and of your own threat to kill him. Nor can it stifle the recollection of the public voice demanding your punishment. You dare to take such a tone as you are taking with me? You dare here under heaven to stand and lie to me that you may give false glows to the villainy of your present deed. For that is the purpose of your falsehood, since you asked me what purpose there could be for it. What had you to set against all that, to convince me that your hands were clean, to induce me to keep the troth which, God forgive me, I had plighted to you? My word, he answered her in a ringing voice. Your lie, she amended. Do not suppose, said he, that I cannot support my word by proofs if called upon to do so. Proofs. She stared at him, wide-eyed a moment. Then her lip curled, and that no doubt was the reason of your flight, when you heard that the Queen's pursuivants were coming in response to the public voice to call you to account. He stood at gaze a moment, utterly dumbfounded. My flight? He said. What fable's that? You will tell me next that you did not flee, that is another false charge against you. So, he said slowly, it was believed I fled. And then light burst upon him. to dazzle and stun him. It was so inevitably what must have been believed, and yet it had never crossed his mind. Oh, the damnable simplicity of it. At another time, his disappearance must have provoked comment and investigation, perhaps. But happening when it did, the answer to it came promptly and convincingly, and no man troubled to question further. Thus was Lionel's task made doubly easy. Thus was his own guilt made doubly sure in the eyes of all. His head sank upon his breast. What had he done? Could he still blame Rosamond for having been convinced by so overwhelming a piece of evidence? Could he still blame her if she had burnt unopened the letter which he had sent her by the hand of Pitt? What else indeed could any suppose but that he had fled? And that being so, clearly such a flight must brand him irrefutably for the murderer he was alleged to be. How could he blame her if she had ultimately been convinced by the only reasonable assumption possible? A sudden sense of the wrong he had done rose now like a tide about him. "My God!" he groaned like a man in pain. "My God!" He looked at her, and then averted his glance again, unable now to endure the haggard, strained yet fearless gaze of those brave eyes of hers. "What else, indeed, could you believe?" he muttered brokenly, thus giving some utterance to what was passing through his mind. "Naught else but the whole vile truth," she answered fiercely, and thereby stung him anew, whipped him out of his sudden weakening back to his mood of resentment and vindictiveness. She had shown herself, he thought in that moment of reviving anger, too ready to believe what told against him. "The truth," he echoed and eyed her boldly now. "Do you know the truth when you see it? We shall discover. For by God's light you shall have the truth laid stark before you now, and you shall find it hideous beyond all your hideous imaginings." There was something so compelling now in his tone and manner that it drove her to realize that some revelation was impending. She was conscious of a faint excitement, a reflection perhaps of the wild excitement that was astir in him. "Your brother," he began, "met his death at the hands of a false weakling whom I loved, towards whom I had a sacred duty. Straight from the deed, he fled to me for shelter. A wound he had taken in the struggle left that trail of blood to mark the way he had come." He paused, and his tone became gentler. It assumed the level note of one who reasons impassively. Was it not an odd thing, now, that none should ever pause to seek with certainty whence that blood proceeded, and to consider that I bore no wound in those days? Master Bain knew it, for I submitted my body to his examination, and a document was drawn up and duly attested which should have sent the Queen's pursuivants back to London with drooping tails had I been at Pinero to receive them. Faintly through her mind stirred the memory that Master Bain had urged the existence of some such document, that in fact he had gone so far as to have made oath of this very circumstance now urged by Sir Oliver, and she remembered that the matter had been brushed aside as an invention of the justices to answer the charge of laxity in performance of his duty, particularly as the only co-witness he could cite was Sir Andrew Flack, the parson, since deceased. Sir Oliver's voice drew her attention from that memory. "But let that be," he was saying. "Let us come back to the story itself. I gave the craven weakling shelter. Thereby I drew down suspicion upon myself, and since I could not clear myself save by denouncing him, I kept silent. That suspicion drew to certainty when the woman to whom I was betrothed, recking nothing of my oaths, freely believing the very worst of me, made an end of our betrothal, and thereby branded me a murderer and a liar in the eyes of all. Indignation swelled against me. The Queen's pursuivants were on their way to do what the justices of Truro refused to do. So far I have given you facts. Now I give you surmise, my own conclusions, but surmise that strikes, as you shall judge, the very bull's-eye of truth. That dastard to whom I had given sanctuary, to whom I had served as a cloak, measured my nature by his own in fear that I must prove unequal to the fresh burden to be cast upon me. He feared lest under strain of it I should speak out, advance my proofs, and so destroy him. There was the matter of that wound, and there was something still more unanswerable he feared I might have urged. There was a certain woman, a wanton up at Malpas, who could have been made to speak, who could have revealed a rivalry concerning her betwixt the slayer and your brother. For the affair in which Peter Godolphin met his death was a pitifully, shamefully sordid one at bottom. For the first time she interrupted him, fiercely. "Do you malign the dead?" "Patience, mistress," he commanded. "I malign none. I speak the truth of a dead man, that the truth may be known of two living ones. Hear me out, then. I have waited long, and survived the deal that I might tell you this. That craven then conceived that I might become a danger to him. So he decided to remove me. He contrived to have me kidnapped one night and put aboard a vessel to be carried to Barbary and sold there as a slave. That is the truth of my disappearance. And the slayer, whom I befriended and sheltered at my own bitter cost, profited yet further by my removal. God knows whether the prospect of such profit was a further temptation to him. In time, he came to succeed me in my possessions, and at last to succeed me even in the affections of the faithless woman who once had been my affianced wife. At last she started from the frozen patience in which she had listened hitherto. Do you say that Lionel? She was beginning in a voice choked by indignation. And then Lionel spoke at last, straightening himself into a stiffly upright attitude. He lies, he cried. He lies, Rosamond. Do not heed him. I do not, she answered, turning away. A wave of color suffused the swarthy face of Sakr el-Bahr. A moment his eyes followed her as she moved away a step or two. Then they turned their blazing light of anger upon Lionel. He strode silently across to him, his mien so menacing that Lionel shrank back in fresh terror. Sakr el-Bahr caught his brother's wrist in a grip that was as that of a steel manacle. We'll have the truth this night if we have to tear it from you with red-hot pincers, he said between his teeth. He dragged him forward to the middle of the terrace and held him there before Rosamond, forcing him down upon his knees into a cowering attitude by the violence of that grip upon his wrist. Do you know aught of the ingenuity of Moorish torture? He asked him. You may have heard of the rack and the wheel and the thumbscrew at home. They are instruments of voluptuous delight compared with the contrivances of Barbary to loosen stubborn tongues. White and tense, her hands clenched, Rosamond seemed to stiffen before him. You coward, you cur, you craven renegade dog, she branded him. Oliver released his brother's wrist and beat his hands together. Without heeding Rosamond, he looked down upon Lionel, who cowered shuddering at his feet. What do you say to a match between your fingers? Or do you think a pair of bracelets of living fire would answer better? To begin with, a squat, sandy-bearded, turbaned fellow, rolling slightly in his gait, came, as had been prearranged, to answer the corsair summons. With the toe of his slipper, Sakr el-Bahr stirred his brother. Look up, dog, he bade him. Consider me that man, and see if you know him again. Look at him, I say. And Lionel looked, yet since clearly he did so without recognition, his brother explained. His name among Christians was Jasper Lee. He was the skipper you bribed to carry me into Barbary. He was taken in his own toils when his ship was sunk by Spaniards. Later he fell into my power, and because I forbore from hanging him, he is today my faithful follower. I should bid him tell you what he knows, he continued, turning to Rosamond, if I thought you would believe his tale. But since I am assured you would not, I will take other means. He swung round to Jasper again. Bid Ali heat me a pair of steel manacles and a brazier, and hold them in readiness against my need of them. And he waved his hand. Jasper bowed and vanished. The bracelet shall coax confession from your own lips, my brother. I have naught to confess, protested Lionel. You may force lies from me with your ruffianly tortures. Oliver smiled. Not a doubt, but that lies will flow from you more readily than truth. But we shall have truth, too. In the end, never doubt it. He was mocking, and there was a subtle purpose underlying his mockery. And you shall tell a full story, he continued, in all its details, so that Mistress Rosamond's last doubt shall vanish. You shall tell her how you lay in wait for him that evening in Godolphin Park, how you took him unawares, and— That is false, cried Lionel in a passion of sincerity that brought him to his feet. It was false, indeed, and Oliver knew it, and deliberately had recourse to falsehood, using it as a fulcrum upon which to lever out the truth. He was cunning as all the fiends, and never perhaps did he better manifest his cunning. False, he cried with scorn. Come, now be reasonable. The truth, ere torture sucks it out of you. Reflect that I know all, exactly as you told it me. How is it now? Lurking behind a bush, you sprang upon him unawares and ran him through before he could so much as lay a hand to his sword. And so— The lie of that is proven by the very facts themselves, was a furious interruption. A subtle judge of tones might have realized that here was truth indeed, angry, indignant truth that compelled conviction. His sword lay beside him when they found him. But Oliver was loftily disdainful. "Did I not know? Yourself you drew it after you had slain him." The taunt performed its deadly work. For just one instant Lionel was carried off his feet by the luxury of his genuine indignation, and in that one instant he was lost. "As God's my witness, that is false," he cried wildly. "And you know it. I fought him fair." He checked on a long, shuddering, indrawn breath that was horrible to hear. Then silence followed, all three remaining motionless as statues. Rosamund white and tense, Oliver grim and sardonic, Lionel limp, and overwhelmed by the consciousness of how he had been lured into self-betrayal. At last it was Rosamund who spoke, and her voice shook and shifted from key to key despite her strained attempt to keep it level. What did you say, Lionel?" she asked. Oliver laughed softly. He was about to add proof of his statement, I think. He jeered. He was about to mention the wound he took in that fight, which left those tracks in the snow, thus to prove that I lied, as indeed I did, when I said that he took Peter unawares. "Lionel!" she cried. She advanced a step, and made as if to hold out her arms to him, then let them fall again beside her. He stood stricken, answering nothing. "Lionel!" she cried again, her voice growing suddenly shrill. "Is this true? Did you not hear him say it?" quoth Oliver. She stood swaying a moment, looking at Lionel, her white face distorted into a mask of unutterable pain. Oliver stepped towards her, ready to support her, fearing that she was about to fall. But with an imperious hand she checked his advance, and by a supreme effort controlled her weakness. Yet her knees shook under her, refusing their office. She sank down upon the divan and covered her face with her hands. "God, pity me," she moaned, and sat huddled there, shaken with sobs. Lionel started at that heartbroken cry. Cowering, he approached her, and Oliver, grim and sardonic, stood back, a spectator of the scene he had precipitated. He knew that given rope, Lionel would enmesh himself still further. There must be explanations that would damn him utterly. Oliver was well content to look on. "Rosamund!" came Lionel's piteous cry. "Rose! Have mercy! Listen ere you judge me. Listen lest you misjudge me." "Aye, listen to him!" Oliver flung in, with his soft, hateful laugh. "Listen to him. I doubt he'll be vastly entertaining." That sneer was a spur to the wretched Lionel. "Rosamund, all that he has told you of it is false. It was done in self-defense. It is a lie that I took him unawares." His words came wildly now. "We had quarreled about a certain matter, and as the devil would have it, we met that evening in Godolphin Park. He taunted me. He struck me, and finally he drew upon me and forced me to draw that I might defend my life. That is the truth. I swear to you here on my knees in the sight of heaven. And—" "Enough, sir. Enough!" she broke in, controlling herself to check these protests that but heightened her disgust. "Nay, hear me yet, I implore you, that knowing all you may be merciful in your judgment." "Merciful?" she cried, and almost seemed to laugh. "It was an accident that I slew him." Lionel raved on. "I never meant it. I never meant to do more than ward and preserve my life. But when swords are crossed, more may happen than a man intends. I take God to witness that his death was an accident resulting from his own fury." She had checked her sobs, and she considered him now with eyes that were hard and terrible. "Was it also an accident that you left me and all the world in the belief that the deed was your brother's?" she asked him. He covered his face, as if unable to endure her glance. "Did you but know how I loved you, even in those days, in secret, you would perhaps pity me a little," he whimpered. "Pity?" She leaned forward and seemed to spit the word at him. "Steph, man, do you sue for pity, you? Yet you must pity me did you know the greatness of the temptation to which I succumbed. I know the greatness of your infamy, of your falseness, of your cowardice, of your baseness." "Oh!" He stretched out suppliant hands to her. There were tears now in his eyes. "Of your charity, Rosamund." He was beginning, when at last Oliver intervened. "I think you are wearying the lady," he said, and stirred him with his foot. "Relate to us instead some more of your astounding accidents. They are more diverting. Elucidate the accident by which you had me kidnapped to be sold into slavery. Tell us of the accident by which you succeeded to my property. Expound to the full the accidental circumstances of which throughout you have been the unfortunate victim. Come, man, ply your wits. 'Twill make a pretty tale." And then came Jasper to announce that Ollie waited with the brazier and the heated manacles. "They are no longer needed," said Oliver. "Take the slave hence with you. Bid Ollie to take charge of him, and at dawn to see him chained to one of the oars of my galliass. Away with him." Lionel rose to his feet, his face ashen. "Wait, wait, Rosamund," he cried. Oliver caught him by the nape of his neck, spun him round, and flung him into the arms of Jasper. "Take him away," he growled, and Jasper took the wretch by the shoulders and urged him out, leaving Rosamund and Oliver alone with the truth under the stars of Barbary. Chapter 12. The subtlety of Fenzileh. Oliver considered the woman for a long moment as she sat half-crouching on the divan, her hands locked, her face set and stony, her eyes lowered. He sighed gently and turned away. He paced the parapet and looked out upon the city, bathed in the white glare of the full-risen moon. There arose thence a hum of sound, dominated, however, by the throbbing song of a nightingale somewhere in his garden and the croaking of the frogs by the pool in the valley. Now that truth had been dragged from its well and tossed, as it were, into Rosamund's lap, he felt none of the fierce exultation which he had conceived that such an hour as this must bring him. Rather, indeed, was he saddened and oppressed. To poison the unholy cup of joy which he had imagined himself draining with such thirsty zest, there was that discovery of a measure of justification for her attitude towards him in her conviction that his disappearance was explained by flight. He was weighed down by a sense that he had put himself entirely in the wrong, that in his vengeance he had overreached himself, and he found the fruits of it, what had seemed so desirably luscious, turning to ashes in his mouth. Long he stood there, the silence between them entirely unbroken. Then at length he stirred, turned from the parapet, and paced slowly back until he came to stand beside the divan, looking down upon her from his great height. "At last you have heard the truth," he said, and as she made no answer, he continued, "I am thankful it was surprised out of him before the torture was applied, else you might have concluded that pain was wringing a false confession from him." He paused, but still she did not speak. Indeed, she made no sign that she had heard him. "That," he concluded, "was the man whom you preferred to me. Faith, you did not flatter me, as perhaps you may have learnt." At last she was moved from her silence, and her voice came dull and hard. "I have learned how little there is to choose between you," she said. "It was to have been expected. I might have known two brothers could not have been so dissimilar in nature. Oh, I am learning a deal and swiftly." It was a speech that angered him, that cast out entirely the softer mood that had been growing in him. "You are learning?" he echoed. "What are you learning?" "Knowledge of the ways of men." His teeth gleamed in his wry smile. "I hope the knowledge will bring you as much bitterness as the knowledge of women, of one woman, has brought me, to have believed me what you believe me whom you conceive yourself to love." He felt, perhaps, the need to repeat it, that he might keep the grounds of his grievance well before his mind. "If I have a mercy to beg of you, it is that you will not shame me with the reminder of your faithlessness," he asked, "of your disloyal readiness to believe the worst evil of me, of my ever having believed that I loved you. That is a thought that shames me, as nothing else in life could shame me, as not even the slave market and all the insult to which you have submitted me could shame me. You taunt me with my readiness to believe evil of you." "I do more than taunt you with it," he broke in, his anger mounting under the pitiless lash of her scorn. "I lay to your charge the wasted years of my life, all the evil that has followed out of it, all that I have suffered, all that I have lost, all that I am become." She looked up at him coldly, astonishingly mistress of herself. "You lay all this to my charge?" she asked him. "I do." He was very vehement. "Had you not used me as you did, had you not lent a ready ear to lies, that whelp my brother would never have gone to such lengths, nor should I ever have afforded him the opportunity." She shifted on the cushions of the divan and turned her shoulder to him. "All this is very idle," she said coldly. Yet perhaps because she felt that she had need to justify herself, she continued, "If, after all, I was so ready to believe evil of you, it is that my instincts must have warned me of the evil that was ever in you. You have proved to me tonight that it was not you who murdered Peter. But to attain that proof you have done a deed that is even fouler and more shameful, a deed that reveals to the full the blackness of your heart." Have you not proved yourself a monster of vengeance and impiety? She rose and faced him again in her sudden passion. Are you not, you that were born a Cornish Christian gentleman, become a heathen and a robber, a renegade and a pirate? Have you not sacrificed your very God to your vengeful lust? He met her glance fully, never quailing before her denunciation, and when she had ended on that note of question, he counter-questioned her. And your instincts have forewarned you of all this? God's life, woman, can you invent no better tale than that? He turned aside as two slaves entered bearing an earthenware vessel. Here comes your supper. I hope your appetite is keener than your logic. They set the vessel, from which a savory smell proceeded, upon the little Moorish table by the divan. On the ground beside it, they placed a broad dish of baked earth, in which there were a couple of loaves and a red, short-necked amphora of water, with a drinking cup placed over the mouth of it to act as a stopper. They salaamed profoundly and padded softly out again. Sup, he bade her shortly. I want no supper, she replied, her manner sullen. His cold I played over her. Henceforth, girl, you will consider not what you want, but what I bid you do. I bid you eat. About it, therefore. I will not. Will not, he echoed slowly. Is that a speech from slave to master? Eat, I say. I cannot, she protested. A slave may not live who cannot do her master's bidding. Then kill me, she answered fiercely, leaping up to confront and dare him. Kill me. You are used to killing, and for that at least I should be grateful. I will kill you if I please, he said in level icy tones. But not to please you. You don't yet understand. You are my slave, my thing, my property, and I will not suffer you to be damaged save at my own good pleasure. Therefore, eat, or my Nubian shall whip you to quicken appetite. For a moment she stood defiant before him, white and resolute. Then quite suddenly, as if her will was being bent and crumpled under the insistent pressure of his own, she drooped and sank down again to the divan. Slowly, reluctantly she drew the dish nearer. Watching her, he laughed quite silently. She paused, appearing to seek for something. Failing to find it, she looked up at him again, between scorn and intercession. Am I to tear the meat with my fingers? She demanded. His eyes gleamed with understanding, or at least with suspicion. But he answered her quite calmly. It is against the prophet's law to defile meat or bread by the contact of a knife. You must use the hands that God has given you. Do you mock me with the prophet and his laws? What are the prophet's laws to me? If eat I must, at least I will not eat like a heathen dog, but in Christian fashion. To indulge her, as it seemed, he slowly drew the richly hilted dagger from his girdle. Let that serve you, then, he said, and carelessly he tossed it down beside her. With a quick and drawn breath, she pounced upon it. At last, she said, you give me something for which I can be grateful to you. And on the word she laid the point of it against her breast. Like lightning, he had dropped to one knee, and his hand had closed about her wrist with such a grip that all her arm felt limp and powerless. He was smiling into her eyes, his swarthy face close to her own. Did you indeed suppose I trusted you? Did you really think me deceived by your sudden pretense of yielding? When will you learn that I am not a fool? I did it but to test your spirit. Then now you know its temper, she replied. You know my intention. Forewarned, forearmed, said he. She looked at him with something that would have been mockery but for the contempt that colored it too deeply. Is it so difficult a thing, she asked, to snap the thread of life? Are there no ways of dying save by the knife? You boast yourself my master, that I am your slave, that, having bought me in the marketplace, I belong to you body and soul. How idle is that boast! My body you may bind and confine, but my soul... Be very sure that you shall be cheated of your bargain. You boast yourself lord of life and death. A lie. Death is all that you can command. Quick steps came pattering up the stairs, and before he could answer her, before he had thought of words in which to do so, Ollie confronted him with the astounding announcement that there was a woman below asking urgently to speak with him. A woman? He questioned, frowning. A Nazrani woman, do you mean? No, my lord. A Muslim, was the still more surprising information. A Muslim woman here? Impossible. But even as he spoke, a dark figure glided like a shadow across the threshold on to the terrace. She was in black from head to foot, including the veil that shrouded her, a veiled proportions of a mantle, serving to dissemble her very shape. Ali swung upon her in a rage. "Did I not bid thee wait below, thou daughter of shame?" he stormed. "She has followed me up, my lord, to thrust herself in here upon you. Shall I drive her forth?" "Let her be," said Sakr el-Bahr, and he waved Ali away. "Leave us." Something about that black immovable figure arrested his attention and fired his suspicions. Unaccountably, almost it brought to his mind the thought of a Eubel Sarnan, and the bidding there had been for Rosamund in the sock. He stood waiting for his visitor to speak and disclose herself. She on her side continued immovable until Ali's footsteps had faded in the distance. Then, with a boldness entirely characteristic, with the recklessness that betrayed her European origin, intolerant of the Muslim restraint imposed upon her sex, she did what no true believing woman would have done. She tossed back that long black veil and disclosed the pale countenance and languorous eyes of Fenzileh. For all that it was no more than he had expected, yet upon beholding her, her countenance thus bared to his regard, he recoiled a step. "Fenzileh," he cried, "what madness is this?" Having announced herself in that dramatic fashion, she composedly readjusted her veil, so that her countenance should once more be decently concealed. "To come here to my house, and thus," he protested, "should this reach the ears of thy lord, how will it fare with thee and with me? Away, woman, and at once," he bade her. "No need to fear his knowing of this unless thyself thou tell him," she answered. "To thee I need no excuse if thou wilt he, but remember that like thyself I was not born a Muslim. But Algiers is not thy native Sicily, and whatever thou wast born it were well to remember what thou art become." He went on at length to tell her the precise degree of her folly, but she cut in, stemming his protestation in full flow. "These are idle words that but delay me. To thy purpose, then, in Allah's name, that thus thou mayest depart the sooner." She came to it straight enough on that uncompromising summons. She pointed to Rosamund. "It concerns that slave," said she. "I sent my wazer to the sock today with orders to purchase her for me." "So I had supposed," he said. "But it seems that she caught thy fancy, and the fool suffered himself to be outbid then. Well, thou wilt relinquish her to me at the price she cost thee?" A faint note of anxiety trembled in her voice. "I am anguished to deny thee, O Fenzileh. She is not for sale." "Ah, wait," she cried. "The price paid was high, many times higher than I have ever heard tell was given for a slave, however lovely. Yet I covet her. 'Tis a whim of mine, and I cannot suffer to be thwarted in my whims. To gratify this one, I will pay 3,000 philips." He looked at her and wondered what devilries might be stirring in her mind, what evil purpose she desired to serve. "Thou wilt pay 3,000 philips?" he said slowly, then bluntly asked her, "Why?" "To gratify a whim, to please a fancy." "What is the nature of this costly whim?" he insisted. "The desire to possess her for my own," she answered evasively. "And this desire to possess her, whence has it sprung?" he returned, as patient as he was relentless. "You ask too many questions," she exclaimed with a flash of anger. He shrugged and smiled. "You answer too few." She set her arms akimbo and faced him squarely. Faintly through her veil he caught the gleam of her eyes, and he cursed the advantage she had in that her face was covered from his reading. "In a word, Oliver Reese," said she, "wilt sell her for 3,000 philips?" "In a word, no," he answered her. "Thou wilt not? Not for 3,000 philips." Her voice was charged with surprise, and he wondered was it real or assumed. "Not for 30,000, answered he. "She is mine, and I'll not relinquish her. So since I proclaim my mind, and since the tarry here is fraught with peril for us both, I beg thee to depart." There fell a little pause, and neither of them noticed the alert interest stamped upon the white face of Rosamund. Neither of them suspected her knowledge of French, which enabled her to follow most of what was said in the lingua franca they employed. Fenzileh drew close to him. "Thou wilt not relinquish her, eh?" she asked, and he was sure she sneered. "Be not so confident. Thou wilt be forced to it, my friend. If not to me, why then to Assad? He is coming for her himself in person." "Assad!" he cried, startled now. "Assad-din," she answered, and upon that resumed her pleading. "Come, then. It were surely better to make a good bargain with me than a bad one with the Basha. He shook his head and planted his feet squarely. I intend to make no bargain with either of you. This slave is not for sale. Shalt thou dare resist Asad? I tell thee, he will take her, whether she be for sale or not. I see, he said, his eyes narrowing. And the fear of this, then, is the source of thy whim to acquire her for thyself. Thou art not subtle, O Fenzeli. The consciousness that thine own charms are fading sets thee trembling lest so much loveliness should entirely cast thee from thy lord's regard. If he could not see her face, and study the effect of that thrust of his, at least he observed the quiver that ran through her muffled figure. He caught the note of anger that throbbed in her reply. And if that were so, what is to thee? It may be much or little, he replied thoughtfully. Indeed, it should be much, she answered quickly, breathlessly. Have I not ever been thy friend? Have I not ever urged thy valor on my lord's notice, and wrought like a true friend for thine advancement, Sakr el Bahr? He laughed outright. Hast thou so, quoth he? Laugh as thou wilt, but it is true, she insisted. Lose me and thy most valuable ally is lost, one who has the ear and favor of her lord. For look, Sakr el Bahr, it is well befall if another came to fill my place, another who might poison Asad's mind with lies against thee. For surely she cannot love thee, this Frankish girl whom thou hast torn from her home. Be not concerned for that, he answered lightly, his wit striving in vain to plumb the depths and discover the nature of her purpose. This slave of mine shall never usurp thy place beside Asad. O fool, Asad will take her whether she be for sale or not. He looked down upon her, head on one side and arms akimbo. If he can take her from me, the more easily can he take her from thee. No doubt thou hast considered that, and in some dark Sicilian way considered too how to provide against it. But the cost, hast thou counted that? What will Asad say to thee when he learns how thou hast thwarted him? What do I care for that? She cried in sudden fury, her gestures becoming a little wild. She will be at the bottom of the harbor, by then with a stone about her neck. He may have me whipped. No doubt he will. But 'twill end there. He will require me to console him for his loss, and so all will be well again. At last he had drawn her, pumped her dry, as he imagined. Indeed, he thought, he had been right to say she was not subtle. He had been a fool to have permitted himself to be intrigued by so shallow, so obvious a purpose. He shrugged and turned away from her. Depart in peace, O Fenzeli, he said. I yield her to none, be his name Asad or Shaitan. His tone was final, and her answer seemed to accept at last his determination. Yet she was very quick with that answer. So quick that he might have suspected it to be preconceived. Then it is surely thine intent to wed her. No voice could have been more innocent and guileless than was hers now. If so, she went on, it were best done quickly, for marriage is the only barrier Asad will not overthrow. He is devout, and out of his deep reverence for the Prophet's law, he would be sure to respect such a bond as that, but be very sure that he will respect nothing short of it. Yet notwithstanding her innocence and assumed simplicity, because of it perhaps, he read her as if she had been an open book. It no longer mattered that her face was veiled. And thy purpose would be equally well served, ere he questioned her, sly in his turn. Equally, she admitted. Say better, Fenzeli, he rejoined. I said thou art not subtle. By the Quran, I lied. Thou art subtle as a serpent. Yet I see whither thou art gliding. Were I to be guided by thine advice, a twofold purpose would be served. First, I should place her beyond Asad's reach, and second, I should be embroiled with him for having done so. What could more completely satisfy thy wishes? Thou dost me wrong, she protested. I have ever been thy friend. I would that... She broke off suddenly to listen. The stillness of the night was broken by cries from the direction of the Bab-el Web. She ran swiftly to the parapet, whence the gate was to be seen, and leaned far out. Look, look, she cried, and there was a tremor of fear in her voice. It is the Asad Din. Sakr el Bahr crossed to her side, and in a glare of torches saw a body of men coming forth from the black archway of the gate. It almost seems as if, departing from thy usual custom, thou hast spoken truth, O Fenzeli. She faced him, and he suspected the venomous glance darted at him through her veil. Yet her voice when she spoke was cold. In a moment thou wilt have no single doubt of it. But what of me? The question was added in a quickening tone. He must not find me here. He would kill me, I think. I am sure he would, Sakr el-Bahr agreed. Yet muffled thus, who should recognize thee? Away, then, ere he comes. Take cover in the courtyard until he shall have passed. Didst thou come alone? Should I trust anyone with the knowledge that I had visited thee? She asked, and he admired the strong Sicilian spirit in her that not all these years in the Basha's harem had sufficed to extinguish. She moved quickly to the door, to pause again on the threshold. Thou wilt not relinquish her? Thou wilt not? Be at ease, he answered her, on so resolved a note that she departed satisfied. Chapter 13. In the sight of Allah. Sakr el-Bahr stood lost in thought after she had gone. Again he weighed her every word and considered precisely how he should meet Asad, and how refuse him, if the Bashas were indeed such an errand as Fenzli had heralded. Thus in silence he remained waiting for Ali or another to summon him to the presence of the Basha. Instead, however, when Ali entered, it was actually to announce Asad-Din, who followed immediately upon his heels, having insisted in his impatience upon being conducted straight to the presence of Sakr el-Bahr. The peace of the Prophet upon thee, my son, was the Basha's greeting, and upon thee, my lord. Sakr el-Bahr salaamed. My house is honored. With a gesture he dismissed Ali. I come to thee a suppliant, said Asad, advancing. A suppliant, thou? No need, my lord. I have no will that is not the echo of thine own. The Basha's questing eyes went beyond him and glowed as they rested upon Rosamund. I come in haste, he said. Like any callow lover, guided by my every instinct to the present of her I seek, this Frankish pearl, this pen-faced captive of thy latest raid. I was away from the Casbah when that pig Tsammani returned thither from the Sock, but when at last I learnt that it had failed to purchase her as I commanded, I could have wept for very grief. I feared at first that some merchant from the Sus might have bought her and departed, but when I heard, blessed be Allah, that thou wert the buyer, I was comforted again. For thou wilt yield her up to me, my son. He spoke with such confidence that Oliver had a difficulty in choosing the words that would disillusion him. Therefore he stood in hesitancy a moment. I will make good thy loss, Asad ran on. Thou shalt have the 1,600 philips paid, and another 500 to console thee. Say that will content thee, for I boil with impatience. Sakr el-Bahr smiled grimly. It is an impatience well known to me, my lord, where she is concerned, he answered slowly. I boil with it myself for 5 interminable years. To make an end of it, I went a distant perilous voyage to England in a captured Frankish vessel. Thou didst not know, O Asad, else thou wouldst. Bah! broke in the Basha. Thou art a huckster-born. There is none like thee, Sakr el-Bahr, in any game of wits. Well, name thine own price. Strike thine own profit out of my impatience, and let us have done. My lord, he said quietly, it is not the prophet that is in question. She is not for sale. Asad blinked at him, speechless, and slowly a faint color crept into his sallow cheeks. Not for sale? He echoed, faltering in his amazement. Not if thou offer me thy bashalik as the price of her, was the solemn answer. Then more warmly, in a voice that held a note of intercession. Ask anything else that is mine, he continued, and gladly will I lay at thy feet in earnest of my loyalty and love for thee. But I want nothing else. Asad's tone was impatient, petulant almost. I want the slave. Then, replied Oliver, I cast myself upon thy mercy, and beseech thee to turn thine eyes elsewhere. Asad scowled upon him. Dost thou deny me? He demanded, throwing back his head. Alas, said Sakr el-Bahr. There fell a pause. Darker and darker grew the countenance of Asad. Fiercer glowed the eyes he bent upon his lieutenant. I see, he said at last, with a calm so oddly at variance with his looks as to be sinister. I see. It seems that there is more truth in Fenzli than I suspected. So, he considered the corsair a moment with his sunken, smoldering eyes. Then he addressed him in a tone that vibrated with a suppressed anger. Bethink thee, Sakr el-Bahr, of what thou art, of what I have made thee. Bethink thee of all the bounty these hands have lavished on thee. Thou art my own lieutenant, and mayest one day be more. In Algiers there is none above thee save myself. Art, then, so thankless as to deny me the first thing I ask of thee? Truly is it written ungrateful is man. Didst thou know, began Sakr el-Bahr. "All that is involved for me in this, I neither know nor care," Asad cut in. "Whatever it may be, it should be as naught when set against my will." Then he discarded anger for cajolery. He set a hand upon Sakr el-Bahr's stalwart shoulder. "Come, my son, I will deal generously with the out of my love, and I will put thy refusal from my mind. Be generous, my lord, to the point of forgetting that ever thou didst ask me for her. Dost still refuse?" The voice, honeyed an instant ago, rang harsh again. "Take care how far thou strain my patience. Even as I have raised thee from the dirt, so at a word can I cast thee down again. Even as I broke the shackles that chained thee to the rower's bench, so can I rivet them on thee anew. All this canst thou do," Sakr el-Bahr agreed. "And since, knowing it, I still hold what is doubly mine, by right of capture and of purchase, thou mayest conceive how mighty are my reasons. Be merciful, then, Asad." "Must I take her by force in spite of thee?" roared the Basha. Sakr el-Bahr stiffened. He threw back his head and looked the Basha squarely in the eyes. "Whilst I live, not even that mayest thou do," he answered. "Disloyal, mutinous dog, wilt thou resist me? It is my prayer that thou not be so ungenerous and unjust as to compel thy servant to a course so hateful." Asad sneered. "Is that thy last word?" he demanded. "Save only that in all things else I am thy slave, O Asad." A moment the Basha stood regarding him, his glance baleful. Then deliberately, as one who has taken his resolve, he strode to the door. On the threshold, he paused and turned again. "Wait," he said, and on that threatening word departed. Sakr el-Bahr remained a moment where he had stood during the interview. Then, with a shrug, he turned. He met Rosamund's eyes fixed intently upon him, and invested with a look he could not read. He found himself unable to meet it, and he turned away. It was inevitable that in such a moment the earlier stab of remorse should be repeated. He had overreached himself indeed. Despair settled down upon him, a full consciousness of the horrible thing he had done, which seemed now so irrevocable. In his silent anguish, he almost conceived that he had mistaken his feeling for Rosamund, that far from hating her as he had supposed, his love for her had not yet been slain. Else surely he should not be tortured now by the thought of her becoming Asad's prey. If he hated her, indeed, as he had supposed, he would have surrendered her and gloated. He wondered was his present frame of mind purely the result of his discovery that the appearances against him had been stronger far than he imagined, so strong as to justify her conviction that he was her brother's slayer. And then her voice, crisp and steady, cut into his torture of consideration. "Why did you deny him?" He swung round again to face her, amazed, horror-stricken. "You understood?" he gasped. "I understood enough," said she. "This lingua franca is none so different from French." And again she asked, "Why did you deny him?" He paced across to her side and stood looking down at her. "Do you ask why?" "Indeed," she said bitterly. "There is scarce a need, perhaps. And yet can it be that your lust of vengeance is so insatiable that sooner than willingly forego an ounce of it you will lose your head?" His face became grim again. "Of course," he sneered, "it would be so that you'd interpret me. Nay, if I have asked it is because I doubt. Do you realize what it can mean to become the prey of Asad ed-Din?" She shuddered, and her glance fell from his, yet her voice was composed when she answered him. "Is it so very much worse than become the prey of Oliver Rees or Sakr el-Bahr, or whatever they may call you? If you say that it is all one to you, there's an end to my opposing him," he answered coldly. "You may go to him. If I resisted him, like a fool, perhaps, it was for no sake of vengeance upon you. It was because the thought of it fills me with horror. Then it should fill you with horror of yourself no less," said she. His answer startled her. "Perhaps it does," he said, scarcely above a murmur. "Perhaps it does." She flashed him an upward glance, and looked as if she would have spoken. But he went on, suddenly passionate, without giving her time to interrupt him. "Oh, God! It needed this to show me the vileness of the thing I have done. Asad has no such motives as had I. I wanted you that I might punish you. But he... Oh, God!" he groaned, and for a moment put his face to his hands. She rose slowly, a strange agitation stirring in her bosom galloping. But in his overwrought condition, he failed to observe it, And then, like a ray of hope to illumine his despair, came the counsel that Fenzli had given him, the barrier which he had said that Assad, being a devout Muslim, would never dare to violate. "There is a way," he cried. "There is the way suggested by Fenzli at the promptings of her malice." An instant he hesitated, his eyes averted. Then he made his plunge. "You must marry me." It was almost as if he had struck her. She recoiled. Instantly suspicion awoke in her. Swiftly it drew to a conviction that he had but sought to trick her by a pretended penitence. "Marry you," she echoed. "Aye," he insisted. And he set himself to explain to her how, if she were his wife, she must be sacred and inviolable to all good Muslimeen, that none could set a finger upon her without doing outrage to the Prophet's holy law, and that, whoever might be so disposed, Assad was not of those, since Assad was perfervidly devout. Thus only, he ended, can I place you beyond his reach. But she was still scornfully reluctant. "It is too desperate a remedy even for so desperate and ill," said she, and thus drove him into a frenzy of impatience with her. "You must, I say," he insisted, almost angrily. "You must, or else consent to be born this very night to Assad's harem, and not even as his wife, but as a slave. Oh! You must trust me for your own sake. You must." "Trust you," she cried, and almost laughed in the intensity of her scorn. "Trust you? How can I trust one who is a renegade and worse?" He controlled himself that he might reason with her, that by cold logic he might conquer her consent. "You are very unmerciful," he said. "In judging me, you leave out of all account the suffering through which I have gone, and what yourself contributed to it. Knowing now how falsely I was accused and what other bitter wrongs I suffered, consider that I was one whom the man and the woman I most loved in all this world had proven false. I had lost faith in man and in God. And if I became a Muslim, a renegade, and a corsair, it was because there was no other gate by which I could escape the unutterable toil of the oar to which I had been chained." He looked at her sadly. "Can you find no excuse for me in all that?" It moved her a little, for she maintained a hostile attitude. At least she put aside her scorn. "No wrongs," she told him, almost with sorrow in her voice, "could justify you in outraging chivalry, in dishonoring your manhood, in abusing your strength to persecute a woman. Whatever the causes that may have led to it, you have fallen too low, sir, to make it possible that I should trust you." He bowed his head under the rebuke, which already he had uttered in his own heart. It was just and most deserved, and since he recognized its justice, he found it impossible to resent it. "I know," he said, "but I am not asking you to trust me to my profit, but to your own. It is for your sake alone that I implore you to do this." Upon a sudden inspiration, he drew the heavy dagger from his girdle and proffered it, hilt foremost. "If you need an earnest of my good faith," he said, "take this knife with which tonight you attempted to stab yourself. At the first sign that I am false to my trust, use it as you will, upon me or upon yourself." She pondered him in some surprise. Then slowly she put out her hand to take the weapon, as he bade her. "Are you not afraid," she asked him, "that I shall use it now and so make an end?" "I am trusting you," he said, "that in return you may trust me. Further, I am arming you against the worst. For if it comes a choice between death and Assad, I shall approve your choice of death. But let me add that it were foolish to choose death whilst yet there is a chance of life." "What chance?" she asked, with a faint return of her old scorn. "The chance of life with you?" "No," he answered firmly. "If you will trust me, I swear that I will seek to undo the evil I have done. Listen, at dawn my galleass sets out upon a raid. I will convey you secretly aboard and find a way to land you in some Christian country, Italy or France, whence you may make your way home again. But meanwhile," she reminded him, "I shall become your wife." He smiled wistfully. "Do you still fear a trap? Can naught convince you of my sincerity? A Muslim marriage is not binding upon a Christian, and I shall account it no marriage. It will be no more than a pretense to shelter you until we are away. How can I trust your word in that?" "How?" He paused, baffled, but only for a moment. "You have the dagger," he answered pregnantly. She stood considering, her eyes upon the weapon's lividly gleaming blade. "And this marriage," she asked, "how is it to take place?" He explained to her then that by the Muslim law, all that was required was a declaration made before a cadi or a superior and in the presence of witnesses. He was still at his explanation when from below there came a sound of voices, the tramp of feet, and the flash of torches. "Here is Assad returning in force," he cried, and his voice trembled. "Do you consent?" "But the Cuddy?" she inquired, and by the question he knew that she was Wanda's way of saving her. "I said the Cuddy or his superior. Assad himself shall be our priest. His followers are witnesses. And if he refuses?" "He will refuse," she cried, clasping her hands before her in her excitement. "I should not ask him. I shall take him by surprise. It must anger him. He may avenge himself for what he must deem a trick." "Aye," he answered, wild-eyed. "I have thought of that, too. But it is a risk we must run. If we do not prevail, then—" "I have the dagger," she cried fearlessly. "And for me, there will be the rope or the sword," he answered. "Be calm. They come." But the steps that padded up the stairs were Ali's. He flung upon the terrace in alarm. My lord, Assad ad-Din is here in force. He has an armed following with him." "There is naught to fear," said Sakr-el-Bahr, with every show of calm. "All will be well." Assad swept up the stairs and out upon that terrace to confront his rebellious lieutenant. After him came a dozen black-robed janissaries with scimitars, along which the light of the torches rippled in little runnels as of blood. The Basha came to a halt before Sakr-el-Bahr, his arms majestically folded, his head thrown back, so that his long white beard jutted forward. "I am returned," he said, "to employ force where gentleness will not avail. Yet I pray that Allah may have lighted thee to a wiser frame of mind." "He has indeed, my lord," replied Sakr-el-Bahr. "The praise to him!" exclaimed Assad in a voice that rang with joy. "The girl, then—" and he held out a hand. Sakr-el-Bahr stepped back to her and took her hand in his as if to lead her forward. Then he spoke the fateful words. "In Allah's holy name and in his all-seeing eyes, before thee, Assad ad-Din, and in the presence of these witnesses, I take this woman to be my wife by the merciful law of the Prophet of Allah, the all-wise, the all-pitying." The words were out, and the thing was done before Assad had realized Corsair's intent. A gasp of dismay escaped him. Then his visage grew inflamed, his eyes blazed. But Sakr-el-Bahr, cool and undaunted before that royal anger, took the scarf that lay about Rosamund's shoulders, and raising it, flung it over her head, so that her face was covered by it. May Allah rot off the hand of him who in contempt of our Lord Muhammad's holy law may dare to unveil that face, and may Allah bless this union, and cast into the pit of Gehenna any who shall attempt to dissolve a bond that is tied in his all-seeing eyes. It was formidable, too formidable for Assad ad-Din. Behind him his janissaries like hounds in leash stood eagerly awaiting his command. But none came. He stood there breathing heavily, swaying a little, and turning from red to pale in the battle that was being fought within him between rage and vexation on the one hand and his profound piety on the other. And as he yet hesitated, perhaps Sakr-el-Bahr assisted his piety to gain the day. "Now you understand why I would not yield her, O mighty Assad," he said. "Thyself hast thou oft and rightly reproached me with my celibacy, reminding me that it is not pleasing in the sight of Allah, that it is unworthy a good Muslim. At last it hath pleased the Prophet to send me such a maid as I could take to wife." Assad bowed his head. "What is written," he said in the voice of one who would admonish himself. Then he raised his arms aloft. "Allah is all-knowing," he declared. "His will be done." "Ameen," said Sakr-el-Bahr very solemnly, and with a great surge of thankful prayer to his own long-forgotten God. The Basha stayed yet a moment, as if he would have spoken. Then abruptly he turned and waved a hand to his janissaries. "Away!" was all he said to them, and stalked out in their wake. Chapter 14. The sign, from behind her lattice, still breathless from the haste she had made, and with her whelp Marzak at her side, Fenzeli had witnessed that first angry return of the Basha from the house of Sakr-el-Bahr. She had heard him bawling for Abdul Mokhtar, the leader of his janissaries, and she had seen the hasty mustering of a score of these soldiers in the courtyard, where the ruddy light of torches mingled with the white light of the full moon. She had seen them go hurrying away with Assad himself at their head, and she had not known whether to weep or to laugh, whether to fear or to rejoice. "It is done," Marzak had cried exultantly. "The dog hath withstood him, and so destroyed himself. There will be an end to Sakr-el-Bahr this night." And he had added, "The praise to Allah! But from Fenzeli came no response to his prayer of thanksgiving. True, Sakro Bar must be destroyed, and by a sword that she herself had forged. Yet was it not inevitable that the stroke which laid him low must wound her on its repercussion? That was the question to which now she sought an answer. For all her eagerness to speed the corsair to his doom, she had paused sufficiently to weigh the consequences to herself. She had not overlooked the circumstance that an inevitable result of this must be Assad's appropriation of that Frankish slave girl. But at the time it seemed to her that even this price was worth paying to remove Sakro Bar definitely and finally from her son's path, which shows that, after all, Fenzeli the mother was capable of some self-sacrifice. She comforted herself now with the reflection that the influence, whose waning she feared might be occasioned by the introduction of a rival into Assad's harem, would no longer be so vitally necessary to herself, and Marzak, once Sakro Bar were removed. The rest mattered none so much to her, yet it mattered something, and the present state of things left her uneasy, her mind a cockpit of emotions. Her grasp could not encompass all her desires at once, it seemed, and while she could gloat over the gratification of one, she must bewail the frustration of another. Yet in the main she felt that she should count herself the gainer. In this state of mind she had waited, scarce heeding the savagely joyous and entirely selfish babblings of her cub, who cared little what might betide his mother as the price of the removal of that hated rival from his path. For him, at least, there was nothing but profit in the business, no cause for anything but satisfaction, and that satisfaction he voiced with fine contempt for his mother's feelings. Anon they witnessed Assad's return. They saw the Janissaries come swinging into the courtyard and range themselves there whilst the Basha made his appearance, walking slowly, with steps that dragged a little, his head sunk upon his breast, his hands behind him. They waited to see slaves following him, leading or carrying the girl he had gone to fetch. But they waited in vain, intrigued and uneasy. They heard the harsh voice in which Assad dismissed his followers, and the clang of the closing gate. And they saw him pacing there alone in the moonlight, ever in that attitude of dejection. What had happened? Had he killed them both? Had the girl resisted him to such an extent that he had lost all patience, and in one of those rages begotten of such resistance made an end of her? Thus did Fenzeli question herself, and since she could not doubt but that Sakro Bar was slain, she concluded that the rest must be as she conjectured. Yet, the suspense torturing her, she summoned Ayub and sent him to glean from Abdul Mokhtar the tale of what had passed. In his own hatred of Sakro Bar, Ayub went willingly enough and hoping for the worst. He returned disappointed, with a tale that sowed dismay in Fenzeli and Marzak. Fenzeli, however, made a swift recovery. After all, it was the best that could have happened. It should not be difficult to transmute that obvious dejection of Assad's into resentment, and to fan this into a rage that must end by consuming Sakro Bar. And so the thing could be accomplished without jeopardy to her own place at Assad's side, for it was inconceivable that he should now take Rosamund to his harem. Already the fact that she had been paraded with naked face among the faithful must in itself have been a difficult obstacle to his pride. But it was utterly impossible that he could so subject his self-respect to his desire as to take to himself a woman who had been the wife of his servant. Fenzeli saw her way very clearly. It was through Assad's devoutness, as she herself had advised, though scarcely expecting such rich results as these, that he had been thwarted by Sakro Bar. That same devoutness must further be played upon now to do the rest. Taking up a flimsy silken veil, she went out to him where he now sat on the divan under the awning, alone there in the tepid-scented summer night. She crept to his side with the soft, graceful, questing movements of a cat, and sat there a moment unheeded almost, such was his abstraction, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "Lord of my soul," she murmured presently, "thou art sorrowing." Her voice was in itself a soft and soothing caress. He started, and she caught the gleam of his eyes turned suddenly upon her. "Who told thee so?" he asked suspiciously. "My heart," she answered, her voice melodious as a viol. "Can sorrow burden thine and mine go light?" she wooed him. "Is happiness possible to me when thou art downcast? In there I felt thy melancholy and thy need of me, and I am come to share thy burden, or to bear it all for thee." Her arms were raised, and her fingers interlocked themselves upon his shoulder. He looked down at her, and his expression softened. He needed comfort, and never was she more welcome to him. Gradually, and with infinite skill, she drew from him the story of what had happened. When she had gathered it, she loosed her indignation. "The dog!" she cried. "The faithless, ungrateful hound! Yet have I warned thee against him, O light of my poor eyes, and thou hast scorned me for the warnings uttered by my love. Now at last thou knowest him, and he shall trouble thee no longer. Thou wilt cast him off, reduce him again to the dust from which thy bounty raised him." But Asad did not respond. He sat there in a gloomy abstraction, staring straight before him. At last he sighed wearily. And he had a conscience, as odd a thing as it was awkward in a corsair basha. "In what hath befallen," he answered moodily, "there is naught to justify me in casting aside the stoutest soldier of Islam. My duty to Allah will not suffer it. Yet his duty to thee suffered him to thwart thee, O my lord," she reminded him very softly. "In my desires, aye," he answered, and for a moment his voice quivered with passion. Then he repressed it and continued more calmly. "Shall my self-seeking overwhelm my duty to the faith? Shall the matter of a slave girl urge me to sacrifice the bravest soldier of Islam, the stoutest champion of the Prophet's law? Shall I bring down upon my head the vengeance of the one by destroying a man who is a scourge of scorpions unto the infidel, and all this that I may gratify my personal anger against him, that I may avenge the thwarting of a petty desire? Dost thou still say, O my life, that Sakr el-Bahr is the stoutest champion of the Prophet's law?" she asked him softly, yet on a note of amazement. "It is not I that say it, but his deeds," he answered sullenly. "I know of one deed no true believer could have wrought. If proof were needed of his infidelity, he hath now afforded it in taking to himself a Nazrani wife. Is it not written in the book to be read, 'Marry not idolatresses'? Is not that the Prophet's law? And hath he not broken it, offending at once against Allah and against thee, O fountain of my soul?" Asad frowned. Here was truth indeed, something that he had entirely overlooked. Yet justice compelled him still to defend Sakr el-Bahr, or else perhaps he but reasoned to prove to himself that the case against the corsair was indeed complete. He may have sinned in thoughtlessness, he suggested. At that she cried out in admiration of him. "What a fount of mercy and forbearance art thou, O father of Marzak! Thou art he, right as in all things." It was no doubt in thoughtlessness that he offended, but would such thoughtlessness be possible in a true believer, in one worthy to be dubbed by the champion of the Prophet's holy law? It was a shrewd thrust that pierced the armor of conscience in which he sought to empanoply himself. He sat very thoughtful, scowling darkly at the inky shadow of the wall which the moon was casting. Suddenly he rose. "By Allah, thou art right," he cried, "so that he thwarted me and kept that Frankish woman for himself. He cared not how he sinned against the law." She glided to her knees and coiled her arms about his waist, looking up at him. "Still art thou ever merciful, ever sparing in adverse judgment. Is that all his fault, O Asad?" "All?" he questioned, looking down at her. "What more is there? I would there were no more. Yet more there is, to which thy angelic mercy blinds thee. He did worse. Not merely was he reckless of how he sinned against the law, he turned the law to his own base uses, and so defiled it." "How?" he asked quickly, eagerly almost. "He employed it as a bulwark behind which to shelter himself and her. Knowing that thou who art the lion and defender of the faith wouldst bend obediently to what is written in the book, he married her to place her beyond thy reach. The praise to him who is all-wise and lent me strength to do naught unworthy," he cried in a great voice, "glorify himself. I might have slain him to dissolve the impious bond, yet I obeyed what is written. Thy forbearance hath given joy to the angels," she answered him, "and yet a man was found so base as to trade upon it and upon thy piety, O Asad." He shook off her clasp and strode away from her a prey to agitation. He paced to and fro in the moonlight there, and she, well content, reclined upon the cushions of the divan, a thing of infinite grace, her gleaming eyes discreetly veiled from him, waiting until her poison should have done its work. She saw him halt and fling up his arms, as if apostrophizing heaven, as if asking a question of the stars that twinkled in the wide-flung nimbus of the moon. Then at last he paced slowly back to her. He was still undecided. There was truth in what she had said, yet he knew and weighed her hatred of Sakr el-Bahr, knew how it must urge her to put the worst construction upon any act of his, knew her jealousy for Marzak, and so he mistrusted her arguments and mistrusted himself. Also, there was his own love of Sakr Bar that would insist upon a place in the balance of his judgment. His mind was in turmoil. Enough, he said almost roughly. I pray that Allah may send me counsel in the night. And upon that he stalked past her, up the steps, and so into the house. She followed him. All night she lay at his feet to be ready at the first peep of dawn to buttress a purpose that she feared was still weak, and whilst he slept fitfully, she slept not at all, but lay wide-eyed and watchful. At the first note of the mueddin's voice, he leapt from his couch obedient to its summons, and scarce had the last note of it died upon the winds of dawn than he was afoot, beating his hands together to summon slaves, and issuing his orders, from which she gathered that he was for the harbor there and then. May Allah have inspired thee, O my Lord, she cried, and asked him, what is thy resolve? I go to seek a sign, he answered her, and upon that departed, leaving her in a frame of mind that was far from easy. She summoned Marzak, and bade him accompany his father, breathed swift instructions of what he should do and how do it. Thy fate has been placed in thine own hands, she admonished him. See that thou grip it firmly now. In the courtyard, Marzak found his father in the act of mounting a white mule that had been brought him. He was attended by his wazirts of Mani, Biscayne, and some other of his captains. Marzak begged leave to go with him. It was carelessly granted, and they set out, Marzak walking by his father's stirrup, a little in advance of the others. For a while there was silence between father and son, then the latter spoke. It is my prayer, O my father, that thou art resolved to depose the faithless Sakr Bar from the command of this expedition. Asad considered his son with a somber eye. Even now the galleass should be setting out if the argosy is to be intercepted, he said. If Sakr Bar does not command, who shall in heaven's name? Try me, O my father, cried Marzak. Asad smiled with grim wistfulness. Art weary of life, O my son, that thou wouldst go to thy death and take the galleass to destruction? Thou art less than just, O my father, Marzak protested. Yet more than kind, O my son, replied Asad, and they went on in silence thereafter, until they came to the mole. The splendid galleass was moored alongside, and all about her there was great bustle of preparation for departure. Porters moved up and down the gangway that connected her with the shore, carrying bales of provisions, barrels of water, kegs of gunpowder, and other necessaries for the voyage, and even as Asad and his followers reached the head of that gangway, for Negroes were staggering down it under the load of a huge palmetto bale that was slung from staves yoked to their shoulders. On the poop stood Sakr Bar with Othmani, Ali Jasperis, and some other officers. Up and down the gangway paced Larac and Vigitello, two renegade boatswains, one French and the other Italian, who had sailed with him on every voyage of the past 2 years. Larac was superintending the loading of the vessel, bawling his orders for bestowal of provisions here, of water yonder, and of powder about the mainmast. Vigitello was making a final inspection of the slaves at the oars. As the palmetto pannier was brought aboard, Larac shouted to the Negroes to set it down by the mainmast, but here Sakr Bar interfered, bidding them, instead, to bring it up to the stern and place it in the poop house. Asad had dismounted, and stood with Marzak at his side at the head of the gangway, when the youth finally begged his father himself to take command of this expedition, allowing him to come as his lieutenant, and so learn the ways of the sea. Asad looked at him curiously, but answered nothing. He went aboard, Marzak and the others following him. It was at this moment that Sakr Bar first became aware of the Basha's presence, and he came instantly forward to do the honors of his galley. If there was a sudden uneasiness in his heart, his face was calm, and his glance as arrogant and steady as ever. May the peace of Allah overshadow thee in thy house, O mighty Asad, was his greeting. We are on the point of casting off, and I shall sail the more securely for thy blessing. Asad considered him with eyes of wonder. So much effrontery, so much ease after their last scene together seemed to the Basha a thing incredible, unless, indeed, it were accompanied by a conscience entirely at peace. It has been proposed to me that I shall do more than bless this expedition, that I shall command it, he answered, watching Sakr Bar closely. He observed the sudden flicker of the corsair's eyes, the only outward sign of his inward dismay. Command it, echoed Sakr Bar. 'Twas proposed thee, and he laughed lightly as if to dismiss that suggestion. That laugh was a tactical error. It spurred Asad. He advanced slowly along the vessel's waist deck to the mainmast, for she was rigged with main and foremasts. There he halted again to look into the face of Sakro Bar, who stepped along beside him. "Why didst thou laugh?" he questioned shortly. "Why?" "At the folly of such a proposal," said Sakro Bar in haste, too much in haste to seek a diplomatic answer. Darker grew the Basha's frown. "Folly," quoth he. "Wherein lies the folly?" Sakro Bar made haste to cover his mistake. "In the suggestion that such poor quarry as waits us should be worthy thine endeavor, should warrant the Lion of Faith to unsheath his mighty claws. Thou," he continued with ringing scorn, "thou the inspirer of 100 glorious fights in which whole fleets have been engaged to take the seas upon so trivial an errand, one galleass to swoop upon a single galley of Spain. It were unworthy thy great name beneath the dignity of thy valor." And by a gesture he contemptuously dismissed the subject. But Asad continued to ponder him with cold eyes, his face inscrutable. "Why, here's a change since yesterday," he said. "A change, my lord? But yesterday in the marketplace thyself didst urge me to join this expedition and to command it," Asad reminded him, speaking with deliberate emphasis. "Thyself invoked the memory of the days that are gone, when, scimitar in hand, we charged side by side aboard the infidel, and thou didst beseech me to engage again beside thee. And now—" He spread his hands, anger gathered in his eyes. "Whence this change?" he demanded sternly. Sakro Bar hesitated, caught in his own toils. He looked away from Asad a moment. He had a glimpse of the handsome, flushed face of Marzak at his father's elbow, of Biscayne, Samani, and the others all staring at him in amazement, and even of some grimy, sunburned faces from the rower's bench on his left that were looking on with dull curiosity. He smiled, seeming outwardly to remain entirely unruffled. "Why, it is that I have come to perceive thy reason for refusing. For the rest, it is, as I say, the quarry is not worthy of the hunter." Marzak uttered a soft, sneering laugh, as if the true reason of the corsair's attitude were quite clear to him. He fancied, too, and he was right in this, that Sakro Bar's odd attitude had accomplished what persuasions addressed to Asad ad-Din might to the end have failed to accomplish, had afforded him the sign he was come to seek. For it was in that moment that Asad determined to take command himself. "It almost seems," he said slowly, smiling, "as if thou didst not want me. If so, it is unfortunate, for I have long neglected my duty to my son, and I am resolved at last to repair that error. We accompany thee upon this expedition, Sakro Bar. Myself I will command it, and Marzak shall be my apprentice in the ways of the sea." Sakro Bar said not another word in protest against that proclaimed resolve. He salaamed, and when he spoke there was almost a note of gladness in his voice. "The praise to Allah, then, since thou art determined. It is not for me to urge further the unworthiness of the quarry, since I am the gainer by thy resolve." Chapter 15. The Voyage. His resolve being taken, Asad drew Samani aside and spent some moments in talk with him, giving him certain instructions for the conduct of affairs ashore during his absence. That done and the Wazer dismissed, the Basha himself gave the order to cast off, an order which there was no reason to delay, since all was now in readiness. The gangway was drawn ashore, the boatswain's whistle sounded, and the steersmen leapt to their niches in the stern, grasping the shafts of the great steering oars. A second blast rang out, and down the gangway deck came Vigitello and two of his mates, all three armed with long whips of bullock hide, shouting to the slaves to make ready. And then, on the note of a third blast of Larocque's whistle, the 54 poised oars dipped to the water, 250 bodies bent as one. And when they heaved themselves upright again, the great galleass shot forward, and so set out upon her adventurous voyage. From her mainmast a red flag with its green crescent was unfurled to the breeze, and from the crowded mole and the beach where a long line of spectators had gathered, there burst a great cry of valediction. That breeze blowing stiffly from the desert was Lionel's friend that day. Without it, his career at the oar might have been short indeed. He was chained, like the rest, stark naked, save for a loincloth, in the place nearest the gangway on the first starboard bench abaft the narrow waist deck, and ere the galleass had made the short distance between the mole and the island at the end of it, the boatswain's whip had coiled itself about his white shoulders to urge him to better exertion than he was putting forth. He had screamed under the cruel cut, but none had heeded him, lest the punishment should be repeated, He had thrown all his weight into the next strokes of the oar, until by the time the pennant was reached the sweat was running down his body, and his heart was thudding against his ribs. It was not possible that it could have lasted, and his main agony lay in that he realized it, and saw himself face to face with horrors inconceivable that must await the exhaustion of his strength. He was not naturally robust, and he had led a soft and pampered life that was very far from equipping him for such a test as this. But as they reached the pennant and felt the full vigor of that warm breeze, Sakr el-Bahr, who by Assad's command remained in charge of the navigation, ordered the unfurling of the enormous lateen sails on main and foremasts. They ballooned out, swelling to the wind, and the gallias surged forward at a speed that was more than doubled. The order to cease rowing followed, and the slaves were left to return thanks to heaven for their respite, and to rest in their chains until such time as their sinews should be required again. The vessel's vast prow, which ended in a steel ram and was armed with a culverin on either quarter, was crowded with lounging corsairs, who took their ease there until the time to engage should be upon them. They leaned on the high bulwarks or squatted in groups, talking, laughing, some of them tailoring and repairing garments, others burnishing their weapons or their armor, and one swarthy youth there was who thrummed a gimri and sang a melancholy shrill love song, to the delight of a score or so of bloodthirsty ruffians squatting about him in a ring of variegated color. The gorgeous poop was fitted with a spacious cabin, to which admission was gained by two archways curtained with stout silken tapestries, upon whose deep red ground the crescent was wrought in brilliant green. Above the cabin stood the three cressets, or stern lamps, great structures of gilded iron surmounted each by the orb and crescent. As if to continue the cabin forward and increase its size, a green awning was erected from it to shade almost half the poop deck. Here cushions were thrown, and upon these squatted now Asad-ed-Din with Marzak, whilst Biscayne and some 3 or 4 other officers who had escorted him aboard and whom he had retained beside him for that voyage, were lounging upon the gilded balustrade at the poop's forward end, immediately above the rowers' benches. Sakr el-Bahr alone, a solitary figure, resplendent in caftan and turban that were a cloth of silver, leaned upon the bulwarks of the larboard quarter of the poop deck, and looked moodily back upon the receding city of Algiers, which by now was no more than an agglomeration of white cubes piled at the hillside in the morning sunshine. Asad watched him silently a while from under his beetling brows, then summoned him. He came at once, and stood respectfully before his prince. Asad considered him a moment solemnly, whilst a furtive malicious smile played over the beautiful countenance of his son. "Think not, Sakr el-Bahr," he said at length, "that I bear thee resentment for what befell last night, or that happening is the sole cause of my present determination. I had a duty, a long-neglected duty, to Marzak, which at last I have undertaken to perform." He seemed to excuse himself almost, and Marzak mislike both words and tone. Why, he wondered, must this fierce old man, who had made his name a terror throughout Christendom, be ever so soft and yielding where that stalwart and arrogant infidel was concerned? Sakr el-Bahr bowed solemnly. "My lord," he said, "it is not for me to question thy resolves or the thoughts that may have led to them. It suffices me to know thy wishes. They are my law." "Are they so?" said Asad tartly. "Thy deeds will scarce bear out thy protestations." He sighed. "Sorely was I wounded yesternight when thy marriage thwarted me and placed that Frankish maid beyond my reach. Yet I respect this marriage of thine, as all Muslims must, for all that in itself it was unlawful. But there," he ended with a shrug, "we sail together once again to crush the Spaniard. Let no ill will on either side o'ercloud the splendor of our task." "Amen to that, my lord," said Sakr el-Bahr devoutly. "I almost feared—" "No more," the Basha interrupted him. "Thou wert never man to fear anything, which is why I have loved thee as a son." But it suited Marzak not at all that the matter should be thus dismissed, that it should conclude upon a note of weakening from his father, upon what indeed amounted to a speech of reconciliation. Before Sakr el-Bahr could make answer, he had cut in to set him a question laden with wicked intent. "How will thy bride beguile the season of thine absence, O Sakr el-Bahr?" "I have lived too little with women to be able to give thee an answer," said the corsair. Marzak winced before a reply that seemed to reflect upon himself, but he returned to the attack. "I compassionate thee that art the slave of duty, driven so soon to abandon the delight of her soft arms. Where hast thou bestowed her, O captain?" Where should a Muslim bestow his wife but according to the biddings of the Prophet in the house? Marzak sneered. Verily, I marvel at thy fortitude in quitting her so soon. But Asad caught the sneer and stared at his son. What cause is there to marvel in that a true Muslim should sacrifice his inclinations to the service of the faith? His tone was a rebuke, but it left Marzak undismayed. The youth sprawled gracefully upon his cushions, one leg tucked under him. Place no excess of faith in appearances, O my father, he said. No more, growled the Basha. Peace to thy tongue, Marzak, and may Allah the all-knowing smile upon our expedition, lending strength to our arms to smite the infidel to whom the fragrance of the garden is forbidden. To this again Sakr el-Bahr replied Amin, but an uneasiness abode in his heart summoned thither by the questions Marzak had set him. Were they idle words calculated to do no more than plague him and keep fresh in Asad's mind the memory of Rosamund, or were they based upon some actual knowledge? His fears were to be quickened soon on that same score. He was leaning that afternoon upon the rail, idly observing the doling out of the rations to slaves, when Marzak came to join him. For some moments he stood silently beside Sakr el-Bahr watching Vigitello and his men as they passed from bench to bench serving out biscuits and dried dates to the rowers, but sparingly, for oars move sluggishly when stomachs are too well nourished, and giving each to drink a cup of vinegar and water in which floated a few drops of added oil. Then he pointed to a large palmetto bale that stood on the waist deck near the mainmast about which the powder barrels were stacked. That pannier, he said, seems to me oddly in the way yonder. Were it not better to bestow in the hold, where it will cease to be an encumbrance in case of action? Sakr el-Bahr experienced a slight tightening at the heart. He knew that Marzak had heard him command that bale to be borne into the poop cabin, and that anon he had ordered it to be fetched thence when Asad had announced his intention of sailing with him. He realized that this in itself might be a suspicious circumstance, or, rather, knowing what the bale contained, he was too ready to fear suspicion. Nevertheless, he turned to Marzak with a smile of some disdain. I understood, Marzak, that thou art sailing with us as apprentice. What then? Quoth Marzak. Why, merely that it might become thee better to be content to observe and learn. Thou wilt soon be telling me how grapnels should be slung, and how an action should be fought. Then he pointed ahead to what seemed to be no more than a low cloud bank towards which they were rapidly skimming before that friendly wind. Yonder, he said, are the Balearics. We are making good speed. Although he said it without any object other than that of turning the conversation, yet the fact itself was sufficiently remarkable to be worth a comment. Whether rowed by her 250 slaves or sailed under her enormous spread of canvas, there was no swifter vessel upon the Mediterranean than the galleass of Sakr el-Bahr. Onward she leapt now with bellying Tatines, her well-greased keel slipping through the wind-whipped water at a rate which perhaps could not have been bettered by any ship that sailed. If this wind holds, we shall be under the point of Aguila before sunset, which will be something to boast of hereafter, he promised. Marzak, however, seemed but indifferently interested. His eyes continued a while to stray towards that palmetto bale by the mainmast. At length, without another word to Sakr el-Bahr, he made his way abaft and flung himself down under the awning beside his father. Asad sat there in a moody abstraction, already regretting that he should have lent an ear to Fenzli to the extent of coming upon this voyage, and assured by now that at least there was no cause to mistrust Sakr el-Bahr. Marzak came to revive that drooping mistrust. But the moment was ill chosen, and at the first words he uttered on the subject, he was growled into silence by his sire. Thou dost but voice thine own malice, Asad rebuked him, and I am proven a fool in that I have permitted the malice of others to urge me in this matter. No more, I say. Thereupon Marzak fell silent and sulking, his eyes ever following Sakr el-Bahr, who had descended the 3 steps from the poop to the gangway, and was pacing slowly down between the rowers' benches. The corsair was supremely ill at ease, as a man must be who has something to conceal, and who begins to fear that he may have been betrayed. Yet who was there could have betrayed him? But 3 men aboard that vessel knew his secret: Ali, his lieutenant Jasper, and the Italian Vigitello. And Sakr el-Bahr would have staked all his possessions that neither Ali nor Vigitello would have betrayed him, whilst he was fairly confident that in his own interests Jasper also must have kept faith. Yet Marzak's allusion to that palmetto bale had filled him with an uneasiness that sent him now in quest of his Italian boatswain, whom he trusted above all others. "Vigitello," said he, "is it possible that I've been betrayed to the Basha?" Vigitello looked up sharply at the question, then smiled with confidence. They were standing alone by the bulwarks on the waist deck. "Touching what we carry yonder?" quoth he, his glance shifting to the bale. "Impossible. If Assad had knowledge, he would have betrayed it before we left Algiers, or else he would never have sailed without a stouter bodyguard of his own." "What need of bodyguard for him?" returned Sakr el-Bahr, "if it should come to grips between us. As well it may if what I suspect be true. There is no doubt as to the side upon which the corsairs would range themselves." "Is there not?" quoth Vigitello, a smile upon his swarthy face. "Be not so sure. These men have most of them followed thee into a score of fights. To them thou art the Basha, their natural leader. Maybe, but their allegiance belongs to Asad-ed-Din, the exalted of Allah. Did it come to a choice between us, their faith would urge them to stand beside him in spite of any past bonds that may have existed between them and me. Yet there were some who murmured when thou wert superseded in the command of this expedition," Vigitello informed him. "I doubt not that many would be influenced by their faith, but many would stand by thee against the Grand Sultan himself. And do not forget," he added, instinctively lowering his voice, "that many of us are renegados like myself and thee, who would never know a moment's doubt if it came to a choice of sides. But I hope," he ended in another tone, "there's no such danger here." "And so do I in all faith," replied Sakr el-Bahr with fervor. "Yet I am uneasy, and I must know where I stand if the worst takes place. Go thou amongst the men, Vigitello, and probe their real feelings, gauge their humor, and endeavor to ascertain upon what numbers I may count if I have to declare war upon Assad, or if he declares it upon me. Be cautious." Vigitello closed one of his black eyes portentously. "Depend upon it," he said, "I'll bring you word anon." On that they parted, Vigitello to make his way to the prow, and there engage in his investigations. Sakr el-Bahr slowly to retrace his steps to the poop. But at the first bench abaft the gangway he paused, and looked down at the dejected, white-fleshed slave who sat shackled there. He smiled cruelly, his own anxiety forgotten in the savor of vengeance. "So you have tasted the whip already," he said in English, "but that is nothing to what is yet to come. You are in luck that there's a wind today. It will not always be so. Soon shall you learn what it was that I endured by your contriving." Lionel looked up at him with haggard, blood-injected eyes. He wanted to curse his brother, yet was he too overwhelmed by the sense of the fitness of this punishment. "For myself I care nothing," he replied. "But you will?" "Sweet brother," was the answer. "You will care for yourself most damnably and pity yourself most poignantly. I speak from experience. 'Tis odds you will not live, and that is my chief regret. I would you had my thews to keep you alive in this floating hell." "I tell you I care nothing for myself," Lionel insisted. "What have you done with Rosamond?" "Will it surprise you to learn that I played the gentleman and married her?" Oliver mocked him. "Married her?" his brother gasped, blenching at the very thought. "You hound! Why abuse me? Could I have done more?" And with a laugh he sauntered on, leaving Lionel to ride there with the torment of his half-knowledge. An hour later, when the cloudy outline of the Balearic Isles had acquired density and color, Sakr el-Bahr and Vigitello met again on the waist deck, and they exchanged some few words in passing. "It is difficult to say exactly," the boatswain murmured, "but from what I gather, I think the odds will be very evenly balanced, and it were rash in thee to precipitate a quarrel." "I am not like to do so," replied Sakr el-Bahr. "I should not be like to do so in any case. I but desire to know how I stand in case a quarrel should be forced upon me." And he passed on, yet his uneasiness was no whit allayed. His difficulties were very far from solved. He had undertaken to carry Rosamond to France or Italy. He had pledged her his word to land her upon one or the other shore, and should he fail, she might even come to conclude that such had never been his real intention. Yet how was he to succeed, now, since Assad was aboard the galleass? Must he be constrained to carry her back to Algiers as secretly as he had brought her thence, and to keep her there until another opportunity of setting her ashore upon a Christian country should present itself? That was clearly impracticable and fraught with too much risk of detection. Indeed, the risk of detection was very imminent now. At any moment her presence in that pannier might be betrayed. He could think of no way in which to redeem his pledged word. He could but wait in hope, trusting to his luck and to some opportunity which it was impossible to foresee. And so for a long hour or more he paced there moodily to and fro, his hands clasped behind him, his turbaned head bowed in thought, his heart very heavy within him. He was taken in the toils of the evil web which he had spun, and it seemed very clear to him now that nothing short of his life itself would be demanded as the price of it. That, however, was the least part of his concern. All things had miscarried with him, and his life was wrecked. If at the price of it he could ensure safety to Rosamund, that price he would gladly pay. But his dismay and uneasiness all sprang from his inability to discover a way of achieving that most desired of objects even at such a sacrifice. And so he paced on alone and very lonely, waiting and praying for a miracle. Chapter 16. The Pannier. He was still pacing there when an hour or so before sunset, some 15 hours after setting out, they stood before the entrance of a long bottleneck cove under the shadow of the cliffs of Aquila Point on the southern coast of the island of Formentera. He was rendered aware of this and roused from his abstraction by the voice of Asad, calling to him from the poop and commanding him to make the cove. Already the wind was failing them, and it became necessary to take to the oars, as must in any case have happened once they were through the cove's narrow neck in the becalmed lagoon beyond. So Sakr Bar, in his turn, lifted up his voice, and in answer to his shout came Vigitello and Larac. A blast of Vigitello's whistle brought his own men to heel, and they passed rapidly along the benches, ordering the rowers to make ready, whilst Jasper and a half-dozen Muslim sailors set about furling the sails that already were beginning to flap in the shifting and intermittent gusts of the expiring wind. Sakr Bar gave the word to row, and Vigitello blew a second and longer blast. The oars dipped, the slaves strained, and the galleass plowed forward, time being kept by a boatswain's mate who squatted on the waist deck and beat a tom-tom rhythmically. Sakr Bar, standing on the poop deck, shouted his orders to the steersmen in their niches on either side of the stern, and skillfully the vessel was maneuvered to the narrow passage into the calm lagoon whose depths were crystal clear. Here, before coming to rest, Sakr Bar followed the invariable corsair practice of going about, so as to be ready to leave his moorings and make for the open again at a moment's notice. She came at last alongside the rocky buttresses of a gentle slope that was utterly deserted by all save a few wild goats browsing near the summit. There were clumps of broom, thick with golden flower, about the base of the hill. Higher, a few gnarled and aged olive trees reared their gray heads from which the rays of the westering sun struck a glint as of silver. Larac and a couple of sailors went over the bulwarks on the larboard quarter, dropped lightly to the horizontal shaft of the oars, which were rigidly poised, and walking out upon them gained the rocks, and proceeded to make fast the vessel by ropes fore and aft. Sakr Bar's next task was to set a watch, and he appointed Larac, sending him to take his station on the summit of the head, whence a wide range of view was to be commanded. Pacing the poop with Marzak the Basha grew reminiscent of former days when roving the seas as a simple corsair. He had used this cove both for purposes of ambush and concealment. There were, he said, few harbors in all the Mediterranean so admirably suited to the corsair's purpose as this. It was a haven of refuge in case of peril, and an unrivaled lurking place in which to lie in wait for prey. He remembered once having lain there with the formidable dragatrice, a fleet of 6 galleys, their presence entirely unsuspected by the Genoese admiral, Doria, who had passed majestically along with 3 caravels and 7 galleys. Marzak, pacing beside his father, listened but half-heartedly to these reminiscences. His mind was all upon Sakr Bar, and his suspicions of that palmetto bale were quickened by the manner in which for the last 2 hours he had seen the corsair hovering thoughtfully in its neighborhood. He broke in suddenly upon his father's memories with an expression of what was in his mind. "The thanks to Allah," he said, "that it is thou who command this expedition, else might this cove's advantages have been neglected." "Not so," said Asad. "Sakr Bar knows him as well as I do. He has used this vantage point aforetime. It was himself who suggested that this would be the very place in which to await this Spanish craft. Yet had he sailed alone, I doubt if the Spanish argosy had concerned him greatly. There are other matters on his mind. O my father, observe him yonder, all lost in thought. How many hours of this voyage has he spent thus? He is as a man trapped and desperate. There is some fear rankling in him. Observe him, I say." Allah pardon thee, said his father, shaking his old head and sighing over so much impetuosity of judgment. Must thy imagination be forever feeding on thy malice? Yet I blame not thee, but thy Sicilian mother, who has fostered this hostility in thee. Did she not hoodwink me into making this unnecessary voyage? I see thou hast forgot last night and the Frankish slave girl, said his son. Nay, then thou sayest wrong. I have not forgot it. But neither have I forgot that since Allah hath exalted me to be Basha of Algiers, he looks to me to deal in justice. Come, Marzak, set an end to all this. Perhaps tomorrow thou shalt see him in battle, and after such a sight as that never again wilt thou dare say evil of him. Come, make thy peace with him, and let me see better relations betwixt you hereafter. And raising his voice, he called Sakr Obar, who immediately turned and came up the gangway. Marzak stood by in a sulky mood, with no notion of doing his father's will by holding out an olive branch to the man who was like to cheat him of his birthright ere all was done. Yet was it he who greeted Sakr Obar when the corsair set foot upon the poop. Does the thought of the coming fight perturb thee, dog of war? He asked. Am I perturbed, pup of peace? Was the crisp answer. It seems so. Thine aloofness, thine abstractions, are signs of perturbation, thou suppose? Of what else? Sakr Obar laughed. Thou wilt tell me next that I am afraid. Yet I should counsel thee to wait until thou hast smelt blood and powder, and learnt precisely what fear is. The slight altercation drew the attention of Assad's officers who were idling there. Biscayne and some 3 others lounged forward to stand behind the Basha, looking on in some amusement, which was shared by him. Indeed, said Assad, laying a hand upon Marzak's shoulder. His counsel is sound enough. Wait, boy, until thou hast gone beside him aboard the infidel, ere thou judge him easily perturbed. Petulantly Marzak shook off that gnarled old hand. Dost thou, O my father, join with him in taunting me upon my lack of knowledge? My youth is sufficient answer. But at least, he added, prompted by a wicked notion suddenly conceived, at least you cannot taunt me with lack of address with weapons. Give him room, said Sakr Obar with ironical good humor, and he will show us prodigies. Marzak looked at him with narrowing, gleaming eyes. Give me a crossbow, he retorted, and I'll show thee how to shoot, was his amazing boast. Thou wilt show him, roared Assad. Thou wilt show him. And his laugh rang loud and hearty. Go smear the sun's face with clay, boy. Reserve thy judgment, O my father, begged Marzak with frosty dignity. Boy, thou art mad. Why? Sakr Obar's quarrel will check a swallow in its flight. That is his boast, belike, replied Marzak. And what may thine be, quoth Sakr Obar, to hit the island of Formentera at this distance? Dost dare to sneer at me? Cried Marzak, ruffling. What daring would that ask? Wondered Sakr Obar. By Allah thou shalt learn. In all humility I await the lesson, and thou shalt have it, was the answer viciously delivered. Marzak strode to the rail. Ho there, Vigitello, a crossbow for me, and another for Sakr Obar. Vigitello sprang to obey him, whilst Assad shook his head and laughed again. And it were not against the Prophet's law to make a wager. He was beginning when Marzak interrupted him. Already should I propose one, so that, said Sakr Obar, thy purse would come and match thine head for emptiness. Marzak looked at him and sneered. Then he snatched from Vigitello's hands one of the crossbows that he bore and set a shaft to it. And then at last Sakr Obar was to learn the malice that was at the root of all this odd pretense. Look now, said the youth. There is on that palmetto bale a speck of pitch scarce larger than the pupil of my eye. Thou wilt need to strain thy sight to see it. Observe how my shaft will find it. Canst thou better such a shot? His eyes, upon Sakr Obar's face, watching it closely, observed the pallor by which it was suddenly overspread. But the corsair's recovery was almost as swift. He laughed, seeming so entirely careless that Marzak began to doubt whether he had paled indeed, or whether his own imagination had led him to suppose it. Aye, thou wilt choose invisible marks, and wherever the arrow enters thou wilt say, 'Twas there, an old trick, O Marzak. Go cousin women with it. Then, said Marzak, we will take instead the slender cord that binds the bale. And he leveled his bow. But Sakharel Bar's hand closed upon his arm in an easy yet paralyzing grip. "Wait," he said. "Thou wilt choose another mark for several reasons. For one, I'll not have thy shaft blundering through my oarsmen and happily killing one of them. Most of them are slaves specially chosen for their brawn, and I cannot spare any. Another reason is that the mark is a foolish one. The distance is not more than 10 paces, a childish test, which, maybe, is the reason why thou hast chosen it." Marzak lowered his bow and Sakharel Bar released his arm. They looked at each other. The corsair supremely mastered himself and smiling easily, no faintest trace of the terror that was in his soul showing upon his swarthy bearded countenance or in his hard pale eyes. He pointed up the hillside to the nearest olive tree, 100 paces distant. "Yonder," he said, "is a man's mark. Put me a shaft through the long branch of that first olive." Assad and his officers voiced approval. "A man's mark, indeed," said the Basha, "so that he be a marksman." But Marzak shrugged his shoulders with make-believe contempt. "I knew he would refuse the mark I set," said he. "As for the olive branch, it is so large but that a child could not miss it at this distance." "If a child could not, then thou shouldst not," said Sakharel Bar, who had so placed himself that his body was now between Marzak and the palmetto bale. "Let us see thee hit it, O Marzak." And as he spoke, he raised his crossbow, and scarcely seeming to take aim, he loosed his shaft. It flashed away to be checked, quivering, in the branch he had indicated. A chorus of applause and admiration greeted the shot, and drew the attention of all the crew to what was toward. Marzak tightened his lips, realizing how completely he had been outwitted. Willy-nilly, he must now shoot at that mark. The choice had been taken out of his hands by Sakharel Bar. He never doubted that he must cover himself with ridicule in the performance, and that there he would be constrained to abandon this pretended match. "By the Koran," said Biscayne, "thou wilt need all thy skill to equal such a shot, Marzak." "'Twas not the mark I chose," replied Marzak sullenly. "Thou wert the challenger, O Marzak," his father reminded him. "Therefore the choice of mark was his. He chose a man's mark, and by the beard of Muhammad, he showed us a man's shot." Marzak would have flung the bow from him in that moment, abandoning the method he had chosen to investigate the contents of that suspicious palmetto bale. But he realized that such a course must now cover him with scorn. Slowly he leveled his bow at that distant mark. "Have a care of the sentinel on the hilltop," Sakharel Bar admonished him, provoking a titter. Angrily, the youth drew the bow. The cord hummed, and the shaft sped to bury itself in the hills flank a dozen yards from the mark. Since he was the son of the Basha, none dared to laugh outright save his father and Sakharel Bar. But there was no suppressing a titter to express the mockery to which the proven braggart must ever be exposed. Assad looked at him, smiling almost sadly. "See now," he said, "what comes of boasting thyself against Sakharel Bar." "My will was crossed in the matter of a mark," was the bitter answer. "You angered me and made my aim untrue." Sakharel Bar strode away to the starboard bulwarks, deeming the matter at an end. Marzak observed him. Yet at that small mark, he said, "I challenge him again." As he spoke, he fitted a second shaft to his bow. "Behold," he cried and took aim. But swift as thought, Sakharel Bar, heedless now of all consequences, leveled at Marzak the bow which he still held. "Hold," he roared. "Loose thy shaft at that bale, and I loose this at thy throat. I never miss," he added grimly. There was a startled movement in the ranks of those who stood behind Marzak. In speechless amazement, they stared at Sakharel Bar as he stood there, white-faced, his eyes aflash, his bow drawn taut and ready to launch that death-laden quarrel as he threatened. Slowly then, smiling with unutterable malice, Marzak lowered his bow. He was satisfied. His true aim was reached. He had drawn his enemy into self-betrayal. Assad's was the voice that shattered that hush of consternation. "Kellamullah," he bellowed. "What is this? Art thou mad, too, O Sakharel Bar?" "Aye, mad indeed," said Marzak, mad with fear, and he stepped quickly aside so that the body of Biscayne should shield him from any sudden consequences of his next words. "Ask him what he keeps in that pannier, O my father." "Aye, what in Allah's name?" demanded the Basha, advancing towards his captain. Sakharel Bar lowered his bow, master of himself again. His composure was beyond all belief. I carry in it goods a price, which I'll not see real to please a pert boy, he said. Goods a price? Echoed Assad with a snort. They'll need to be a price indeed that are valued above the life of my son. Let us see these goods a price. And to the men upon the waist deck, he shouted, Open me that pannier. Sakr el-Bahr sprang forward and laid a hand upon the Basha's arm. Stay, my lord, he entreated almost fiercely. Consider that this pannier is my own, that its contents are my property, that none has a right to. Which babble of rights to me, who am thy lord? Blazed the Basha, now in a towering passion. Open me that pannier, I say. They were quick to his bidding. The ropes were slashed away, and the front of the pannier fell open on its palmetto hinges. There was a half-repressed chorus of amazement from the men. Sakr el-Bahr stood frozen in horror of what must follow. What is it? What have you found? Demanded Assad. In silence, the men swung the bale about and disclosed to the eyes of those upon the poop deck the face and form of Rosamund Godolphin. Then Sakr el-Bahr, rousing himself from his trance of horror, reckless of all but her, flung down the gangway to assist her from the pannier, and thrusting aside those who stood about her, took his stand at her side.